Love is a beautiful emotion that inspires individuals to accomplish great feats, provides renewed energy, and bestows wings. Unrequited love destroys the purpose of existence, and occasionally may even become a motive for wrongdoing. This noise vaguely resembled a firework explosion, but it wasn't one. A gunshot echoed through the gloomy apartment building. Intrigued individuals began peeking their heads out of doorways to see what had occurred and verify they'd indeed heard a shot. Most of the curious onlookers in the hallway weren't even residents of the complex. They were reporters who had come solely to witness everything firsthand. Outside the building, an incredible scene was unfolding. A crowd of about 100 people watched with fascination and a sort of horrified excitement at the unremarkable window of apartment 24, located several stories up. This was an unattractive old gray structure with small windows, and behind one of them lurked neither a global celebrity nor a local notable. Nevertheless, some young women edged closer to the wall where this mysterious window was situated, shouting that they loved bad boys. They begged for him to look out and show his face, if only for a moment. Gawkers, journalists, and simply inquisitive passers-by pointed their phones toward the window, waiting to see if the person inside would respond to the call. At one point, the window crashed open and a soccer jersey was hung out. Half the crowd outside began applauding vigorously, showing whose side they were on. The other half, consisting of reporters, police officers, and medics, just stood watching the jubilant throng. On one hand, they were stunned by the situation. On the other, the reporters were also anticipating something captivating. But ultimately, no one took any specific action. Meanwhile, some movement occurred at the window. Camera lenses instantly focused on the gray rectangle, holding their breath in anticipation of what would happen next. A head poked out. Everyone expected to see a man, but it wasn't him. It was a very young girl. She appeared to be about 15 years old. She gave a thumbs up as if indicating everything was fine, but her contorted, blotchy face told a different story. Judging by her eyes, this girl had been crying a lot in the past few hours. Her entire body was tense to the extreme, as if she were in mortal danger, and the cheerful gesture couldn't hide her true state. If one zoomed in and looked closely, a gun could be seen behind the girl, pointed directly at her back. Then she vanished, and another 15-year-old schoolgirl appeared in the window, simply waving her hands before being pulled back into the room. A hand with a gun then emerged from the opening and fired a random shot into the crowd. The shooter was a young 22-year-old man from apartment 24. In reality, he had been holding 4 teenagers captive there for 100 hours. This was the longest hostage situation in Brazil's history, and it would end quite differently than many expected. The entire nation was following this crime in real time. The tragedy received widespread publicity in the media, not only because of the incident itself, but also due to the glaring mistakes made by the São Paulo police. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. Eloa, as one of the captive girls was named, had only one chance to save her life. She did everything she could to assist law enforcement. But for some reason, the police didn't take advantage of the opportunity provided. Eloa opened the window again and began lowering an improvised rope made from torn sheets. Its length was just enough for the construction to reach the ground. Pretending to untangle the end, the girl practically lay on the windowsill, giving snipers a chance to make one precise shot. But they didn't take it. The schoolgirl felt the captor's gun pressing into her back, so she couldn't stall any longer. Eloa straightened up, stepped back into the apartment, and began pulling up the homemade rope, which now had a paper bag with food dangling at the very end. This was her only chance at rescue, and it failed. Later, news channels replayed this entire situation several times. The footage showed a crowd passively observing the hostages' actions. They simply watched the window of this apartment building as if it were a TV screen, taking no action. The fact is, there are specially trained individuals capable of negotiating with hostage takers. To do this professionally, one must possess certain skills. For example, having a high level of emotional intelligence. Imagine that at some important event, one of the important educated guests intentionally mispronounced a word. There are three main reactions, three types of people. The first type won't even notice the mistake was made, likely just letting it pass. The second type will definitely point out this error, doing so publicly to demonstrate their own superiority and embarrass the speaker. And finally, the third person will genuinely smile and try to correct the speaker carefully, so as to cause minimal damage to their reputation. Only people of the third type, possessing high communication skills, can become negotiators. They shouldn't ignore the actions of a hostage taker and have no right to abruptly point out the incorrectness of their behavior. They must skillfully guide the criminal to achieve the desired outcome while preserving lives. This is a very complex science. Just a few words, coupled with a certain intonation, can lead to success or ensure the failure of the entire operation. And unfortunately, negotiators can't always bring the situation to the necessary conclusion either. Around noon on Monday, 15-year-old Eloa Pimentel and her best friend Nayara da Silva, along with two of their male classmates, gathered at Eloa's home to work on a joint geography project. A pleasant, friendly atmosphere filled the apartment. The teenagers had just finished a snack, and the apartment's host wanted to tidy up quickly. Eloa's younger brother and parents wouldn't return home until evening, so she needed to put the apartment in order. She stored clothes in the closet, made the bed, washed the dishes, and returned to her guests. Suddenly, the front door burst open, and a man appeared in the doorway. He stood silently for several seconds, staring at the students. His posture was unnaturally tense. He scanned the room as if searching for someone. What troubled the teenagers most was the gun gripped in his hand. All present froze for a moment. The stranger broke the silence, declaring he had come to take Eloa's life. Everyone else had simply ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. After this, the man abruptly lunged toward the boys and struck their heads several times with the pistol grip. Caught off guard, they didn't even have time to comprehend what was happening. Two teenagers and Nayara sat on the bed, unable to move, as the assailant grabbed Eloa and began coldly beating her. Nayara attempted to call for help, but her weak cry was cut short by a gunshot into the wall, after which she fell silent, realizing this person was clearly not joking. His eyes bulged with anger, and he waved the gun around as if it were a toy. The first hour of a hostage situation is the most critical. During this time, the captor experiences an incredible adrenaline rush. It's almost euphoria, an incredible sense of complete power and control over those present. Normal boundaries of reality blur, fear of death vanishes, and a feeling of absolute happiness envelops the criminal, making them feel like a superhero. Such adrenaline surges most often occur in life-threatening situations. For instance, when you're at the epicenter of an earthquake and a building next to you is collapsing. This state usually occurs in the very first minutes of a capture and can last for an hour. Then the adrenaline level drops sharply, and the brain begins to send an alarm signal to the body. Shortness of breath, slight trembling, and profuse sweating appear. Concentration decreases by approximately 35%. The brain starts calculating all possible scenarios, trying to predict the reactions of hostages, police, or negotiators. At this moment, the captor is most dangerous, as their physical state has rapidly deteriorated. The slightest provocation can lead to irreversible consequences. In every such situation, there are three parties involved: the hostage taker, the hostages, and the negotiator. A special tactical action group closely monitored the situation related to the hostage taking in apartment 24. About 100 officers surrounded the building's perimeter. The group's command center was set up in the school attended by Eloa and her three classmates. The police's primary task was to understand what was happening inside Eloa's apartment and attempt to get all hostages out alive. The command center focused on developing a strategy. At the same time, a rapid response team was called in to try to infiltrate and disarm the hostage taker. Several snipers were positioned in nearby buildings, ready to pull the trigger in case of an emergency. All these teams needed to work together, and now they had to patiently wait for the criminal, armed, dangerous, and likely suffering from some mental instability, to present his demands. The Eloa Pimentel case uniquely featured a fourth party beyond the usual three: the press, which was broadcasting the hostage situation live. Along with reporters, a crowd of onlookers gradually gathered on the street, watching the capture unfold in person. This was practically the first instance where an entire country followed a crime in real time. The press, quickly grasping what had occurred, rushed to find information about the girl living in apartment 24 and soon discovered she was 15-year-old Eloa Pimentel. Reporters and their assistants rapidly pieced together the situation and drew their own conclusions based on interviews with acquaintances and neighbors of the main hostage. They learned that Eloa had recently been dating a young man. They had broken up, but the youth, unwilling to let his beloved go, was now holding her hostage. Correspondents spun this story in various ways, making plans and predictions about how soon the lovers would realize they were meant for each other and emerge from the apartment hand in hand. The press even discussed the wedding of the century that would follow the hostage's release. This was the story of two lovers, not yet able to understand their own feelings and emotions, that was presented to viewers on television screens. Reporters managed to reach Eloa's apartment by phone and speak with a young man named Lindenberg Fernandez Alves. This phone conversation was even broadcast live on television, and the hostage-taker admitted that Eloa was indeed his ex-girlfriend. He expressed confidence that everything would soon end in the best possible way. Victor, one of the teenagers in apartment 24, had told his father he'd be home around 5 in the evening. When the boy didn't return at the appointed time after finishing homework with Eloa, his father decided to check if everything was all right. He approached Eloa's apartment door and knocked several times. No one answered. The man was about to leave when he heard strange sounds. He began pounding on the door and kicking it, determined to get inside. Victor's father then heard a warning that if he didn't stop, everyone in the apartment would die. The distressed man rushed down the stairs, trying to call the police as he went. Luckily, he saw a patrol car in the building's courtyard and told the officers everything. One law enforcement officer went to the entrance and wanted to resolve the situation himself. However, instead, he heard threats and nearly got shot as the captor fired several times directly at the door. The loud sounds alarmed the neighbors. People began peering out of their apartments, calling relatives and friends. Information about the hostage situation in Eloa's apartment spread throughout the city like wildfire. A crowd of onlookers instantly began gathering around the apartment building, watching with interest to see how it would all end. Eloa Pimentel was born on April 5, 1993, in Brazil. She was a modest, sometimes overly shy girl. Her mother was her best friend. Since childhood, Eloa dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, so she studied diligently to enter university after school. The girl's parents and her younger brother Douglas knew the hostage-taker Lindenberg Alves well. It was Douglas who introduced his sister to this man. Lindenberg Fernandez Alves was more than 7 years older than Eloa. When they met, he was 20 and the girl was only 13 years old. The young man was a big football fan, but his games usually ended in fistfights. He met Douglas at the stadium, who then introduced him to his sister. Alves worked 2 jobs, as a courier during the day and a pizza delivery man at night. At first, the young girl liked the attention from an adult guy, but when she got to know him better, her desire to date him immediately disappeared. They were complete opposites: smart, diligent Eloa, and aggressive, impulsive Alves. Nevertheless, their communication continued for about 2.5 years. The girl's parents were against her dating an adult man, but it's very difficult to force a 13-year-old schoolgirl to do something against her will. So for Eloa, communicating with Alves was nothing more than teenage rebellion. The girl hardly understood that such a relationship would lead to nothing good, and when she realized it, it was too late. The parents, realizing that prohibitions wouldn't achieve anything, allowed their daughter to meet with Alves, but only at their home. If the couple was going somewhere, Eloa's younger brother Douglas always had to be with them. Over the next 2.5 years, the girl's parents began to perceive Alves as a family member because he was always around. They noticed that the guy tried to control their daughter in every way. He forbade her from communicating with friends, going to events if he wasn't around, and generally reporting to them about her day. Alves himself didn't adhere to his own rules. He spent every weekend at the club, but Eloa's actions were subject to total control. Alves was a real manipulator. He could tell his girlfriend in the evening how bad she was and that she had broken his heart, and in the morning come and act as if nothing had happened, or fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness. These strange relationships continued for almost 3 years. One evening, Eloa came to her mother's room and said she no longer wanted to date anyone. She decided to focus entirely on her studies. The woman, of course, supported her daughter, not yet knowing what they would have to endure. Since the young couple broke up, Alves never doubted for a moment that he could get Eloa back. He simply began stalking her everywhere. When Eloa walked home from school, the man would slowly ride his motorcycle practically next to her. He didn't try to start a conversation, just silently stayed nearby and kept his eyes on her. Eloa was terrified. She chose new routes to return home, trying to run away from him. She crept through back alleys or crowded places where it was impossible to ride a motorcycle. But wherever she went, she felt Alves was watching her. The man began calling Eloa's home phone. When the girl's mother answered, he warned that he would take desperate measures if Eloa didn't return to him. The woman would hang up, not giving much importance to Alves' words. The young man had always been prone to drama and demanded increased attention to himself. Now it didn't concern them, as the mother thought. Eloa felt like a hostage even before she was actually taken hostage. She was standing at a bus stop, scrolling through something on her phone, when she felt someone watching her. The girl looked around for a motorcycle, didn't notice one, but saw her ex-boyfriend on the opposite side of the street. He stood frowning and kept his eyes on her. Then he darted across traffic and was instantly next to Eloa. Alves began saying he had made many mistakes but still loved her. The girl shielded herself with her textbooks and prayed for the bus to arrive quickly. She decided to ignore the guy to not give him a chance to latch on to her words, but her tactic only angered Alves. He changed in an instant and began shouting, then slapped Eloa with all his might, causing her textbooks to scatter on the ground. This was the first time Alves had raised a hand to her. Eloa ran home in tears and locked herself in her room. Her younger brother Douglas saw his sister's red, swollen face and tried to find out what happened. Eloa didn't answer, but her brother already guessed who was responsible for the girl's condition. The teenager blamed himself for once introducing Alves to his sister and felt responsible for it. When the parents returned home, they were so furious that they called Alves and demanded an apology. In response, he said he could do much worse if Eloa didn't change her decision. And now, armed with a gun and a huge plastic bag of ammunition, Alves came to the apartment where his ex-girlfriend lived and took her and 3 others hostage. Eloa sat on the bed side by side with her 3 friends. She barely audibly tried to calm Alves, agreeing to sort out their relationship one-on-one. The girl even promised she would return to him if he stopped all this. But the guy seemed to have gone off the rails. He shouted that he no longer wanted to be with her. The only goal was to take her life. The hostage-taker took shirts from the laundry and used them to tie up all his victims. He hadn't yet decided what he would do next. Would he make Eloa suffer by dispatching her friends one by one? Or would he send her alone to the afterlife? Although Nayara's presence also greatly irritated Alves. In his opinion, this friend had a bad influence on Eloa, convincing her to break up with her adult boyfriend, so she would probably have to suffer too. As for the boys, they simply evoked dislike in him. Alves, although older, feared he might not be able to handle 4 teenagers. The goal of the first phone conversation between the police and the hostage-taker is to let him know that they are listening and want to help. After that, to find out his main demands. When the negotiator dialed Eloa's apartment number, Alves answered. Someone could be heard screaming on the other end of the line. At this time, the captor was beating his ex-girlfriend. When the police inquired about his demands, Alves told the authorities that he wanted to send Eloa to the afterlife and hung up. After a few minutes, the door of apartment 24 opened and 2 people came out. Footsteps on the stairs quickened, and 2 of Eloa's classmates ran out of the building. The agents hadn't even begun negotiating for their release, but they were already out of the danger zone. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video. It's really important. This transpired on the initial day. Approximately 12 hours had elapsed since the students' confinement in the apartment. Alves paced the room, brandishing a gun. One of the boys, Victor, was sprawled on the floor. He had fainted. Eloa fanned his face with a folded sheet of paper, trying to revive him. The other boy, pale and huddled, sat in a corner. Nayara, Eloa's friend, attempted to reason with the deranged Alves, pleading with him to release at least the boys, who were truly caught in the crossfire by chance. Alves smirked and asked if the girls were afraid to remain alone with him. He himself found it unpleasant to watch his ex-girlfriend fussing over her classmate, so he released the frightened schoolboys without any conditions. This was the police's first victory, although they hadn't really done anything yet. 2 of the 4 hostages exited the ill-fated apartment alive and well. Officers immediately surrounded the victims and began questioning them about the situation inside. The classmates reported that the captor's mood changed every minute. At first, he shouted that no one would leave alive. Then he threatened to only take Eloa's life. Later, he wanted her to witness her own friend's demise. Sometimes he became gentle and reassured the kids not to worry. Everything would end well because he wasn't such a bad guy. But then his eyes would fill with rage again, and he'd become cruel towards Eloa. The tactical team concluded that the criminal was highly unstable and unpredictable. At the same time, he had taken a first step towards cooperation, so a favorable outcome was still possible. With proper negotiator work, success in hostage release cases is 93%. The key is to act consistently, step by step, guiding the captor to abandon his demands and preserve the victims' lives. In apartment number 24, a mobile phone rang. Alves, gripping the gun in one hand, answered with the other. The guy was very interested in how the caller got his number, but the caller asked him several questions about Eloa. He inquired when Alves planned to release the girl. Then he asked to speak briefly with the hostage. Eloa complained to the man on the phone that she was very hungry. When the girl broke down crying on the call, it was disconnected. In reality, this wasn't a call from the negotiator. A reporter had found Alves' number and made this ill-fated call live on television, throwing off the police's strategy. The media wanted an exclusive interview with the hostage taker. It turned out that the authorities couldn't control the journalist's activities. The media had bribed the criminal's relatives or friends to obtain his number. They knew it was highly unethical and interfered with police work, but they repeatedly intervened in the hostage negotiations and spoke with Alves multiple times, thereby endangering the girls' lives. For the media, sky-high ratings for their reports were the top priority. Alves, who relished attention to himself, gladly recounted how poor and miserable he was. He'd tried to talk to his ex-girlfriend numerous times, but she always turned her back on him and refused to listen. That's why he had to resort to crime, to force her to hear him out. The man assured reporters that he'd soon release Eloa and surrender to the police, but this didn't happen. 30 hours had passed since the hostage-taking in apartment number 24. News channels presented the public with a story of an unfortunate young boy in love with a girl, and viewers believed what they were told on screen. Eloa was barely mentioned. Everyone pitied the rejected admirer who had a nervous breakdown and dared to take desperate measures. The police were perplexed. Snipers hesitated to pull the trigger, fearing the consequences. And Alves was getting anxious. To prevent the captor from watching TV and learning about police actions, which were also covered in the news, they cut off electricity to the building. The police asked journalists not to broadcast live, urging them to use any footage after the hostage rescue operation ended. However, they couldn't do anything to stop them. It was sheer madness. After 30 hours of confinement, Alves became increasingly unhinged. He grew irritated by the crowd shouting under the windows, not only words of support, but also various insults. He opened the window, stuck out his gun, and fired randomly at innocent people. Fortunately, no one was hurt. Cutting off electricity in the apartment was part of a tactic often used in hostage situations to inconvenience criminals and force them to negotiate. And it worked. Alves agreed to release another person. Nayara Dosilova's family was waiting for her right at the entrance. The girl was urgently taken to the hospital, although she had no serious injuries. Hostage negotiators talked to her for 6 hours. The schoolgirl told the police that Alves kept her and Eloa in separate rooms. The girl's hands and feet were bound, and their eyes were blindfolded. Throughout the day, she clearly heard Alves beating Eloa. She begged for help, cried, and then everything would stop. And a moment later, the man would start pleading for a kiss, but continued to be rejected. These mood swings happened to Alves due to lack of sleep. He slept in snatches, but every morning was still full of energy. The next day at 8:38 a.m., Nayara's grandmother woke her up, saying the police wanted to talk to her. The schoolgirl didn't understand what else law enforcement wanted from her, as she had told them everything yesterday. The girl and her mother rushed to the command center, located in their school, and heard an unexpected proposal. Nayara's mother's eyes nearly popped out of her head at what the negotiators said. They told her the schoolgirl needed to return to Eloa's apartment. A 15-year-old teenager who had just experienced severe psychological trauma was supposed to voluntarily go back to where she had miraculously escaped just 12 hours ago. But in the police's opinion, this was the only way to save Eloa's life. And the girl agreed. Alves told negotiators he was ready to surrender but feared snipers. He personally requested Nayara and Eloa's younger brother be brought to the door to act as human shields for him. The captor knew the police wouldn't shoot at teenagers. His ex-girlfriend wasn't in a condition to shield anyone, as she needed medical attention. Douglas was to stand at the foot of the stairs, while Nayara approached the front door. The girl climbed the steps while talking on the phone with Eloa and Alves. The man asked her to make sure no police officers were nearby, and Eloa thanked her friend for agreeing to return. When Nayara reached the entrance, the apartment door suddenly swung open, and the schoolgirl saw Eloa's face, covered in purple and blue marks. Before the girl could process what was happening, the man grabbed her wrist, pulled her inside the apartment, and slammed the door shut. On national television, Nayara's family watched live as their daughter was kidnapped again. The police had made a fateful decision, endangering a teenager's life. They took a risk and lost, without even considering how to handle such a scenario. Alves dictated his terms, and the negotiators blindly followed. The girls had been hostages for almost 100 hours. The captor alternated between calm and aggressive states. He physically attacked Eloa, yelled at her, and sometimes was gentle. It was 100 hours of constant stress, life on the edge, psychological manipulation, threats, and assaults. Eloa began losing her mind, but throughout this time she never yielded to Alves. During their relationship, power had been entirely in the man's hands. He was nearly 8 years older, manipulated her in various ways, and forbade everything, and now she refused to give in to him even slightly. She began smashing plates, throwing whatever she could find, and screaming for Alves to either shoot her or finally set her free. Alves panicked. He realized that if the police heard the girl's screams, the tactical team would simply burst into the apartment and shoot him, assuming he was beating the hostages. Not knowing what to do, the man put a gun to Nayara's head and threatened to shoot Eloa's friend if she didn't calm down. To prove his point, he hit Nayara in the stomach. This was the first time Alves had raised a hand to her. The exhausted Eloa no longer feared her own death. For the last 90 hours, Alves had constantly threatened her with violence, but she didn't want to be the cause of her friend's demise. The girl fell silent and sat on the floor mattress next to Nayara. On October 17, 2008, Eloa's mother called Alves. She begged the man to release her daughter and said she would do anything to help them resume their relationship. But Alves no longer cared. He understood that as soon as this ended, he'd be thrown behind bars. So he frankly admitted to his ex-girlfriend's mother that he no longer needed Eloa. The schoolgirls, who overheard the entire conversation, realized nothing good awaited them. If a person has nothing to lose, they're unlikely to show mercy. They sat embracing each other in front of the TV, waiting for it all to end. The man sat next to them, then at some point raised his gun and fired at the wall adjoining the neighboring apartment. That's where the rapid response team was located. This bullet played a decisive role in the fate of the two schoolgirls. Earlier, Alves had spoken with the negotiator and admitted he had no way out and wouldn't let the girls leave the apartment alive. The angel and demon in his head were still fighting, but unfortunately, the latter was starting to win. After Alves hung up, he dragged a coffee table to the apartment's front door and lay down on the mattress to sleep. The girls sat together on the couch, covered themselves with a blanket, and hopelessly watched the TV screen. Around 6 p.m, the tactical team burst through the apartment door. Authorities insisted they only began the assault because they heard a gunshot. They had to act quickly. Usually, entry into the premises is made from several entry points simultaneously, so the captor doesn't have time to react and take the life of any hostages. This provides much more opportunity to neutralize him. But this time, the police only acted through the front door. They blew up the apartment door to scare and momentarily blind the criminal, but they couldn't subdue Alves in a second due to the coffee table leaning against the door, and these few seconds became crucial. The captor turned to the two girls and opened fire on them. At this time, the rapid response group also fired several rubber bullets at Alves. Their goal was to incapacitate him while preserving his life. However, the criminal was shooting real bullets at the girls. Alves was tackled to the floor and handcuffed. Meanwhile, journalists were telling the public live that the hostage taker had agreed to surrender, and at that moment, an explosion rang out. A couple of minutes later, ambulances were rushing through the streets. It's unknown whether the correspondents sincerely believed in their idea of a happy ending to the love story they had been reporting in their coverage. When two bloodied bodies were carried out to the ambulances and emergency aid, it hardly resembled a happy ending. The journalists still didn't give up, trying to push their cameras right up to the ambulance windows to get exclusive footage. At this time, they seemed more like vultures than people. The two girls were urgently taken to the hospital. Nayara was wounded once in the face with the bullet lodged in her jaw. Eloa took 2 shots. One of the bullets passed through her head, causing extensive neurological damage. Brain death was declared. She was put into an artificial coma, but there was no chance of recovery. On October 18, 2008, at 11:30 p.m., Eloa passed away. The farewell ceremony for Eloa Pimentel was attended by several tens of thousands of people. Her heart, lungs, liver, pancreas, kidneys, and corneas were donated to help others. Her parents decided this is what their daughter would have wanted, to extend someone else's life through her passing. Her friend Nayara da Silva fully recovered after undergoing numerous surgeries. The girl said that even knowing she would become a hostage again, she would have gone there without hesitation to save Eloa. The tragedy was widely discussed due to errors made by the São Paulo police. Brazilian media faced even harsher criticism for hindering negotiators' efforts in pursuit of sensationalism. Many channels were fined by the government for obstructing official police work. Alves' trial took place in February 2012 and lasted 4 days. In court, Alves admitted he simply wanted to spend as much time with Eloa as possible. Their intimacy was limited to a kiss on the cheek, but he was obsessed with this girl and now deeply regretted Eloa's absence. According to the defendant, he shot at the girls out of fear when the front door exploded, but he didn't intend to take anyone's life. Alves was found guilty on 12 counts and sentenced to 98 years and 10 months in prison. However, Brazilian law grants him leniency, allowing him to go on leave and work outside prison several days a week. The Eloa Pimentel case became the longest hostage situation in Brazil broadcast live. Unfortunately, many people made mistakes in this story, and the outcome was tragic for everyone involved. Three years after the incident occurred, a mysterious USB drive found its way into the hands of an elderly woman who couldn't recall how she acquired it. This flash drive contained the most disturbing photographs and video recordings, providing evidence of a horrific offense. It seemed as though fate itself desired for the perpetrator to face the consequences of their actions. Today we'll discuss an Australian case that occurred in 2016. It involves a criminal who toyed with human life, and many might consider him deranged. But is that really the case? Her friends called her Michelle. The girl's full name was Meng Mai Lang. She was born in Chengdu, Sichuan Province, People's Republic of China, in 1991 and attended high school there. When Michelle was in her senior year, her father passed away in 2008. The man perished during an earthquake. The daughter struggled deeply with the loss of her closest family member. This tragedy coincided with her high school graduation and college enrollment. Despite the girl's shattered emotional state, Michelle wept even during exams. She was accepted. She completed a broadcasting course and presenter training at Sichuan University. Michelle was extremely close to her mother, Mai John. They were literally dependent on each other, especially after her father's death. However, a couple of years later, in 2011, the young woman left China to continue her studies in Australia. She enrolled at a technology university in Sydney, where she studied economics and hospitality management. Her mother said that Michelle had always dreamed of going to another country. One of the reasons Mai John allowed her daughter to move to Australia was because Michelle's aunt and cousin lived in Sydney. The girl settled in her relative's house, where besides her aunt and 18-year-old cousin, her aunt's fiancé also resided. Shortly after Michelle's move in 2012, her 43-year-old aunt married her boyfriend Derek, who was 22 at the time. Initially, they all lived together in a rented apartment, and after the wedding, they were able to purchase their own home in Campsie Town, about 7 miles from Sydney's central business district. Mai John, Michelle's mother, made a substantial financial contribution to the property purchase, as her daughter liked Australia and wanted to stay there. The woman was thinking about Michelle's future and wanted to somehow thank the relatives for taking care of her niece. In China, there's a tradition of living as one big family, so the girl remained living with her aunt's family, but now in their own apartment instead of a rented one. Michelle was always very kind, sensitive, and loved cooking, and she also adored everything related to beauty and makeup. The student shared numerous videos on social media about cosmetics, posted many selfies, and photos of her adventures in Sydney. She constantly messaged her family, complaining about how much she missed her hometown and especially her mother's cooking. Michelle got along wonderfully with her aunt, her husband, and her cousin. She shared many joint photos taken during holidays on social media, describing how they had a good time together. In general, her aunt's family was quite peculiar. Apart from the fact that there was a huge age difference of over 20 years between the spouses, the young husband stopped working after marriage. Previously, Derek Barrett worked in the IT industry, but now all financial burdens fell on the woman's shoulders. Michelle's aunt worked in another city, Wollongong, located quite far from Sydney, about 60 miles away. It took an hour and a half to get there, so the woman was absent from home for several days in a row. At some point, to help her aunt, Michelle took on the responsibilities of being the housewife. She enjoyed cooking, cleaning, and looking after her younger cousin, although he was only a couple of years younger than her. Michelle completed a course in hotel management, and in 2016 began studying a translation course in Sydney's central business district. The student had specific goals in building her career and was very ambitious. She managed to combine housekeeping with college studies. Moreover, Michelle was still young, so like any 20-year-old, she simply lived and enjoyed her life. She hung out with friends, went to parties, and always tried to look her best. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. Thursday, April 21st, 2016, was an ordinary day. After classes, Michelle met with a friend to go shopping, and although the students didn't buy anything, they had fun trying on various amusing items and taking photos in them. After shopping, around 3 p.m., the girls parted ways at the bus station near the university. Her friend had some urgent matters to attend to, while Michelle decided to continue shopping. She took a bus to a huge shopping center and spent some more time browsing cosmetics and perfume departments. Her movements were recorded by surveillance cameras located in the store. They clearly show that the girl was fine. She was simply enjoying a wonderfully spent time. Michelle reached Campsie Town by train. Arriving at the station at 4:30 p.m., she headed home. That day, her aunt had left for work in Wollongong and was planning to be away for several days. From April 21st to 24, only Derek remained in the apartment, as her cousin planned to stay overnight at a friend's place. Later that same day, Michelle made several phone calls. First, she chatted with her girlfriends, then at 10 p.m., she called her aunt. Around midnight, the student sent a text message with homework to one of her teachers, and after that, no one heard anything more from Michelle Lang. In the following days, the girl's cousin, taking advantage of his mother's absence, only stopped by the house to change clothes and grab a bite to eat. Carefree Derek, in his wife's absence, spent hours lying on the couch in front of the TV or playing computer games. Spending entire nights in front of the monitor, the man didn't even think about where Michelle might have gone. He had no reason to wake up early in the morning, so barely opening his eyes by lunchtime, he assumed his niece had gone to study, and his stepson was old enough to take care of himself. The main thing was that they didn't disturb his rest and enjoyment of life. The young man wasn't particularly worried. Only when a couple of days had passed did he finally realize he hadn't seen Michelle in a while. Derek sent her a message asking if everything was okay, but received no response. On Sunday, April 24th, 2016, around 10 p.m., Derek got in the car and drove to the station to meet his wife, who had just returned home from her business trip. 3 days had passed since Michelle was last seen. The aunt, upon entering the apartment, first asked her husband where her niece was. The woman had called her several times, but she didn't answer. Derek said he had also sent Michelle a message and she hadn't replied. Then the man admitted that he actually hadn't seen the girl for several days. That's when panic began to set in. They rushed to the niece's room and started looking for clues, trying to understand where she might have disappeared to. The couple checked Michelle's computer, her social media, examined the room, but found nothing that could indicate the girl's whereabouts. Deciding that morning is wiser than evening, they only reported the student's disappearance the next day, Monday, April 25th, although no one had seen her since Thursday evening. Derek simply confessed to his wife that he had been sleeping during the day, so he might have simply not noticed Michelle coming home. He hadn't looked into his niece's room or asked where she had been or where she was going. The couple really decided to wait one more night, and if the girl didn't show up, they would go to law enforcement with a report the next day. At the police station, Derek described the situation, explaining to the officers why they didn't immediately seek help. Michelle's aunt added that her niece was a very responsible person. Since the girl moved to live in Australia, she hadn't spent a single night outside the home. Every time she went out with friends, Michelle would let them know where she was going. And now several days had passed as they both unsuccessfully tried to contact her. Several facts pointed to the strange disappearance. Firstly, Michelle's coat, which she usually wore when going out, was left hanging at home in the closet. Secondly, the niece always took an umbrella with her regardless of the weather, but it also remained in the room. Thirdly, her public transport card was also at home. Moreover, Michelle didn't know how to drive, so she couldn't have just gone somewhere by car. After visiting the police station, the aunt decided to inform Mai John, Michelle's mother, about the disappearance. Soon, the missing girl's name appeared on all Chinese social media platforms, as someone from the Lang family had written about her disappearance in hopes of getting any information. Michelle Lang's photos were practically everywhere. Relatives wanted the Chinese community in Australia to join in the search as well. Then rumors began to spread online that Meng Mai was no longer alive and that her body had been found. The family was already on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and these false reports were pulling the rug out from under their feet. Mai John made a statement urging the public to stop unfounded speculation and not interfere with the investigation, because Michelle could still be alive. At least there was no evidence to the contrary at that moment. A couple of days earlier, on April 24, 2016, around 10:30 a.m., A tourist was walking along Snapper Point Beach on the central coast of New South Wales. Snapper Point is a beautiful beach with stunning views and amazing lookouts. This woman was near Snapper Point Cave, which has a blowhole. In fact, it was a rather dangerous area, as several people had already died there due to slippery rocks. People tried to avoid this place, so it was completely silent. The tourist was enjoying the views, stopping near the cave itself and looking down at the raging sea from the height. Then her gaze was drawn to some object floating below in the blowhole. She became curious about what it was and tried to descend a bit lower to get a better look at the find. When it finally dawned on the tourist what she was seeing, she involuntarily cried out and hurried to move away from this horrible place. Below, a human body wrapped in plastic was floating. The woman immediately dialed the police number and reported the gruesome discovery. Rescuers who arrived at the scene initially thought they were dealing with another accident in this area. Someone had disregarded safety rules and slipped on the rocks. They managed to retrieve the body from the water and only then realized they were facing a crime victim, as there was nothing on the body except plastic. There were also no characteristic marks from hitting rocks. However, several stab wounds and other injuries were found. Identifying the victim wasn't possible as there was no identification on her. The body was completely naked and wrapped in a large plastic bag. The police department generated a computer-aided sketch of the unidentified body, describing an Asian woman aged 20 to 30, about 5 feet 7 inches tall, with short black hair. Detectives also concluded that the blowhole wasn't actually the crime scene where the victim was attacked. This happened elsewhere, and she was thrown here to conceal evidence of the crime. Authorities appealed to the public, urging anyone with information to contact the police. The appearance of this sketch led internet users to believe it was Michelle Lang, so the rumors about her death actually had quite strong evidence. They didn't arise out of thin air, as the missing girl's relatives thought. After receiving the report from Michelle's aunt about her niece's disappearance, detectives pieced together the facts and visited the Lang family that same day. The Chinese student fully matched the description of the victim found in the blowhole at Snapper Point Beach. Police officers told Derek and the aunt about the body found a few days ago and offered to conduct a DNA test to rule out the possibility that it was Michelle. They took her toothbrush, some hair left on her comb, some other personal belongings, as well as her personal computer. Derek and the aunt had heard vaguely about some woman whose body was discovered by a random tourist, but it never occurred to them that it could be their niece. To help with the search somehow, Derek informed the police that Michelle had been spending a lot of time online in recent months, communicating with strangers. She even developed a romantic interest in one guy from online. When he and his wife searched through her niece's social media accounts, they saw correspondence with an Australian boy. The aunt immediately disliked the young man. In the photos, he had an unpleasant expression and a fierce look. It's unknown what could have attracted Michelle to him. After all, judging by the messages, they had been communicating for 2 months. The aunt believed that if this boy had done something bad to Michelle, he would have faced resistance and opposition, because she hadn't had intimate relationships with the opposite sex before. Derek further added that recently Michelle had started partying a lot, going to clubs, drinking frequently, and had registered on several online dating apps. However, this seemed unlikely and didn't match at all with what the girl's aunt had said earlier. Therefore, Derek aroused quite the opposite interest from the police. They asked the man to describe what happened on the day he saw Michelle before her disappearance. It turned out that Derek Barrett was the last person to see her alive. The man said that everything was as usual and nothing foreboded trouble. He and his niece had dinner together, then watched some movie. Around midnight, Michelle went to bed, and after that, he didn't see her. The police found it strange that Derek lived in the same apartment with the girl and didn't notice that she hadn't been home for several days. To which Derek reluctantly admitted that when he was immersed in computer games, he himself could be carried out of the house along with the laptop, and he probably wouldn't have noticed. On April 29, 2016, DNA results were received. Unfortunately, they confirmed that the body in the blowhole belonged to Meng Mai Lang. The girl's mother was devastated and immediately flew to Sydney. The police continued their investigation while Michelle's family tried to comprehend the horrifying news. Detectives were still puzzled by Derek's behavior, so they called him to the station and questioned him again. The man repeated the story he had previously told about the last evening with Michelle. Then, for some reason, he mentioned that he didn't stay at home all days. Once he had breakfast with a female friend. This was on April 24th. Meanwhile, investigators checked surveillance camera footage in the area and noticed a suspicious white sedan entering the national park near Lake Munmora just after 7 a.m. on April 24, 2016. According to police, this happened 4 hours before Michelle's body was discovered in the blowhole. Official data showed that Derek Barrett also owned a white car. His mobile phone, as geodata checks revealed, made 2 calls near the place where Michelle was found. During questioning, Derek denied that it was his car in the video. The image was slightly blurry, and license plates were impossible to make out. So Derek took advantage of this and stated that he didn't even know where Snapper Point Beach was, as he had never been there. It was then that the police resumed the investigation and found surveillance camera footage showing Derek buying drinks at a gas station near the Snapper Point area. Additionally, 2 witnesses were found who claimed they saw Derek at the very top of the cliff, right above the blowhole that morning. They were walking along the rocky shore by the waterline when an unknown man called out to them. He warned the young people to move away from the edge because it was dangerous. After the man left, the young people still crept to the edge and surveyed the area but found nothing suspicious. Michelle Lang apparently had visited the place where her body was later found in the past. As 3 years ago, in June 2013, she posted a photo of the exact same blowhole on social media. Another interesting discovery for the police was that Derek had visited his parents' family home that day, who lived just 8 miles from Snapper Point. He spent his childhood there and knew the surroundings well. So his statement that he had no idea where this place was a blatant lie. After this, the police obtained a warrant to search the apartment where Michelle lived with her relatives and to check Derek's mobile phone. The device had likely been cleaned, as it contained a lot of unplayable information, but experts were able to recover some deleted data, and what they found shocked them. On April 29, 2016, Derek Barrett was arrested for the murder of his niece, Michelle Lang, and the whole horrifying truth came to light. So what really happened on that fateful day? It was believed that the marriage between Derek and Aunt Michelle was one of convenience, not love. Given their 20-year age gap, many people were convinced that the woman sought to obtain Australian citizenship this way. Derek, by providing her this opportunity, could avoid working since his aunt promised to take care of him. Derek wasn't blood-related to Michelle and felt physically drawn to this girl. Age-wise, she was much closer to him than his wife, with only a 2-year difference. Once, the man even confessed to his spouse about his attraction to his niece. He saw her daily for 5 years. As soon as the girl appeared in his aunt's house, all of Derek's intimate fantasies were directed solely at her. He was obsessed and dreamed of one day being in Michelle's embrace. There are men who fetishize Asian women. This is a fairly common phenomenon. Sometimes such obsession ends quite tragically, as happened in Michelle Lang's case. Derek later admitted in court that all his thoughts and hidden desires revolved around his niece of Asian descent. Instead of fighting his temptation, in September 2014, he installed a hidden camera in the shared bathroom. The man didn't just violate the girl's privacy, he invaded it in the most brazen way, watching Michelle when she was least protected, and Derek didn't stop at peeping. He entered his niece's bedroom while she slept, filmed her, and then satisfied his lust in the same room, examining her sleeping body. He then pointed the phone camera at himself and recorded his genitals during moments of pleasure. The man did this not once or twice, but regularly. When no one was home, he eagerly rewatched the videos. It's currently unknown if his wife suspected what he was doing, judging by the fact that when the media covered this case, the woman tried to conceal her face in photos and her name. For her, it was no less shocking than for everyone else. All these intimate recordings were made on Derek's ordinary old mobile phone, and they were deleted quite recently, after Michelle's body was discovered. It was thanks to these images that detectives understood how obsessed Derek was with his niece. When a person develops obsessive ideas, when they film or photograph someone to later use these materials for self-gratification, it usually doesn't end there. They can no longer stop. They want complete possession of the object of their base passion. The court transcript detailed the events of the night when Michelle Lang returned home after shopping, as this horrifying scene was also recorded on Derek's phone. That Thursday evening, when the girl went to bed around midnight, Derek attacked her. He enjoyed his power over her all night until 8:40 a.m. the next day. Derek tied Michelle's hands behind her back, gagged her, and wrapped her in tape. Then he started taking photos. There were 11 photos in total, and one of them showed a close-up of the girl's face. The fear in her eyes was evident. Other photos focused on her intimate areas, breasts, and close-ups of her genitals. The judge concluded that Derek forced Michelle to position herself so he could photograph her private parts. The last photo of Michelle was taken on April 22nd at 8:39 a.m. Sometime between this final photo and Sunday morning, April 24th, Derek ended the girl's life using a knife. It's believed that until this point, he had simply been torturing her. The injuries on the student's body told the story of the brutal attack she endured. Michelle actually fought back against Derek. The autopsy revealed 31 stab wounds. There were also numerous blunt force injuries and defensive wounds. The final knife wound was to the throat. Although this neck injury was determined to be the one that ended the girl's life, the amount of blood she lost due to the total number of stab wounds could also have caused her death. The blunt force injuries were likely sustained after death from falling from a height and hitting the water. After Derek took Michelle's life, he wrapped her body in plastic wrap and placed it in his car trunk. He left the apartment at 3:19 a.m. on Sunday, April 24th, and went to a gas station where he bought a couple of drinks. Then he drove to the national park at Lake Munmora, climbed to Snapper Point Cave to a vent hole. He pulled his niece's lifeless body from the trunk, stepped over the barrier railing, and approached the very edge. Derek dropped Michelle's body from a height of 20 feet into the exhaust well. He didn't leave immediately because he needed to capture this moment on his phone. The man took about 7 photos of the rock and water below. It's possible he was simply waiting to see if the body would surface. The most chilling part was that on April 23rd, the day before Derek disposed of Michelle's body, he kept her at home as a captive. At some point, he forgot that besides the two of them, his stepson also lived in the apartment. That's when he was startled by the sound of keys turning in the apartment's front door lock. It was Michelle's cousin, returning home from a sleepover at friends. The young man stayed in the apartment for about 3 hours before leaving again. According to him, Derek spent all this time in the bathroom, keeping the shower running. He left the bathroom only once, quickly ran to his room, then halfway turned around and ran back to the bathroom, locking the door again. After a couple of hours, the young man couldn't stand it anymore, knocked on Derek's door, and asked if everything was okay. Derek opened the door just a crack and advised using the other bathroom, claiming this one smelled bad. It was assumed that the man was keeping Michelle inside the whole time. It's unknown whether the student was alive at that moment. If the girl's brother had caught his stepfather in such an act, everything could have ended even more tragically. And then the aunt would have lost not only her niece, but also her son. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video. It's really important. Later, when Michelle's aunt returned from her business trip, she noticed the apartment was exceptionally clean. The sheets on her niece's bed were washed, floors mopped. The woman was surprised and thought it rather unusual, but she simply dismissed the thought. The second oddity was that several bath towels, a roll of black tape, and a suitcase were missing from the linen closet, and the aunt dismissed it a second time. After a long trip, the woman was only concerned about where her niece had gone, not sheets and towels. Sometimes our minds firmly reject dangerous thoughts that our intuition suggests because we couldn't bear them, couldn't cope. The aunt did have a premonition of an approaching disaster, but she attributed it to worries about Michelle. The police did an excellent job, quickly piecing together the puzzle. Derek was arrested less than 10 days after Michelle vanished. During the trial, Derek confessed to having intimate fantasies about his niece Michelle, and that this led him to install cameras in the shared bathrooms of the family home. Sometimes he used his mobile phone for this, hiding it inconspicuously among men's shaving supplies. Derek also revealed that he often crept into Michelle's bedroom at night while she slept, filmed her, and pleasured himself. The man stated he was certain his wife and stepson would be absent on the days he attacked his niece. However, Derek denied having any intimate contact with Michelle, and there was no evidence that he did. All the police had were photos of the girl bound and gagged. The reason Derek took Michelle Lang's life, according to him, was that he was under the influence of heavy drugs. He allegedly couldn't remember what happened, didn't really understand, couldn't control his behavior at that moment. Derek's lawyer tried to emphasize his client's psychological issues related to his childhood. At the time of the crime, Derek was 27 years old. He had no criminal history but an unhappy childhood. He was bullied and teased at school. He felt socially isolated because of this. In his teenage years, he remained unpopular among his peers, so he immersed himself in computers. During this time, his parents divorced. Later, his mother remarried. The young man dropped out of school without finishing 10th grade. He took information technology courses and then started working in IT. Derek worked there until October 2015, then quit and had been unemployed since, so he didn't stop working immediately after marriage. Until 2012, Derek had only 2 romances. Then he married Michelle's aunt. Initially, the woman wanted children from him, but as she got older, she changed her mind. This led to him feeling rejected again to the point where he started using the services of sex workers and using illegal substances. Because of this, great confusion began in his life. Then Derek told the court that in the week when the crime occurred, he began having memory lapses. He allegedly lost consciousness because at that time, he was spending thousands of dollars on illegal drugs and watching many adult films featuring women of Asian descent. He stated that on Thursday, April 21st, when Michelle was last seen, he took a large dose and was in an uncontrollable state afterwards, as he couldn't remember what happened himself. At one point, Derek claimed that he and his niece had a consensual relationship, as they were about the same age and understood each other well. Her demise was nothing more than the result of an unfortunate, intimate game that ultimately cost Michelle Lang her life. However, during the trial, the prosecution didn't believe a single word Derek said. Judging by the gas station surveillance footage, the man didn't appear to be in any way impaired or under the influence of any substances. On the contrary, he was calm, sober, and composed. A forensic psychiatrist also challenged this fact, saying that the substance Derek claimed to have used typically doesn't lead to memory loss. And if he had indeed consumed the amount he mentioned in his statement, his sexual desire would have decreased instead. According to the doctor's conclusion, the defendant's actions were likely caused by deviant arousal of a violent and sexual nature. Michelle's family, including her aunt and cousin, gave victim impact statements. The aunt felt guilty and responsible for what happened to her niece. After all, it was her husband who took the girl's life, forcing her to endure several hours of humiliation, moral, and physical pain. The defendant himself also made a statement, expressing full remorse for his behavior. He said that Michelle had a bright future ahead, and he took it away. He asked for forgiveness from the family, insisting that his actions betrayed their trust and that he deserves punishment. He felt disgusted with himself. However, Derek's impassioned speech didn't make the impression he apparently hoped for. The judge didn't believe either Derek's sudden amnesia or his deep remorse. I believe the defendant was putting on an act, and for Michelle's family, his actions are unforgivable. On December 15, 2017, the Supreme Court of New South Wales sentenced Derek Barrett to 46 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole after 34 years and 6 months. In 2019, Derek attempted to appeal his sentence but failed. One day in November 2019, a woman went to Strathfield, located 8 miles west of Sydney's central business district, to visit her elderly mother as usual. She saw that the older woman had a flash drive clutched in her hand. Since her mom had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, she couldn't remember where she got this USB drive. At first, the elderly lady's daughter thought it was just some trinket, but upon closer inspection, she realized it was a flash drive. So she took it and plugged it into a computer to see what information it contained. She opened a folder and found a video, then pressed play. The recording showed a young Asian woman lying on a bed and tied up, begging for help. Then a man entered the frame and attacked the captive. The camera suddenly fell to the floor and nothing more could be seen on screen. Only sound remained, with the girl screaming for the man not to go crazy and not dare touch her. The frightened woman immediately called the police and reported the shocking discovery. In total, this flash drive contained 13 photos and 9 video files. They were all taken on April 22 and 23, 2016. Of the 13 photos found on the USB drive, 11 were also stored on Derek's phone. The strangest thing is that to this day, no connection has been found between this elderly woman and Derek Barrett. No one knew where she got this USB drive. Strathfield is a 10-minute drive from Campsie, where Michelle's aunt's family lived. Maybe fate itself intervened in this case to restore justice. Derek had claimed in court that he never molested Michelle, and this flash drive seemed like the girl wanted to prove otherwise from beyond the grave. The emergence of new information in the case prompted a new trial, but at the same time, the shocking video on the USB drive finally undermined the health of Mei Lang, Michelle's mother. The heart of the single mother, who had tried her best to help her daughter during her studies in Sydney, couldn't bear the abuse of her adult child. The woman passed away in 2019 when the flash drive was found. But before that, she managed to ask the judge to sentence the executioner and ruthless murderer to life imprisonment. Derek was charged with 9 more counts. He pleaded guilty to all 9. Unfortunately, this had little effect on his sentence. Derek was given an additional 20 years, but they were to be served concurrently with his existing 46-year prison term, meaning the actual term was barely increased. The possibility of parole was only pushed back by 2 years. He will be eligible for parole in 2053, but does a person who took another's life piece by piece, prolonging his victim's suffering, have the right to life? If you want something done right, do it yourself. This was precisely the motto adopted by the family of the deceased woman who unexpectedly passed away in her own bed. A self-centered spouse, an inexperienced investigator, and a lack of any evidence led to her death being deemed an accident. It was at this point that her parents, who didn't believe their daughter had been deceiving them, took matters into their own hands. Christina Ann Thompson, or Christy as her loved ones called her, was born on January 16, 1978 in Flint, Michigan, to Katie and Harvey. For most of her upbringing, she was raised not by her biological father, but by her stepfather Jim, whom she regarded as her dad. Christy also had 2 wonderful sisters. She was a remarkable individual, the life of any gathering. Cheerful, sociable, and candid, she enjoyed being the center of attention, making others grin and chuckle. Christy adored hosting game nights at home when the whole family came together. In her spare time, she engaged in swimming and scrapbooking. Scrapbooking is a pastime involving the creation and decoration of albums with various clippings, mementos, and souvenirs. All of this is done by hand, resulting in unique photo albums that can be given as gifts or kept as personal keepsakes. It was in these handmade albums that a piece of Christie's spirit was preserved. Her parents, with tears in their eyes, would flip through the pages adorned by their daughter's hand when she was far from them. In 1997, the young woman met Jason Harris at a party, and although they were complete opposites, as they say, opposites attract. Jason, a quiet, shy guy, reserved with his emotions, and the cheerful Christy were very different. But from their first encounter, they found common ground and soon began dating. Despite their completely mismatched personalities, they seemed like an excellent couple. In 2003, Christy and Jason tied the knot. The bride that day, according to friends, simply radiated with joy. In 2009, the couple welcomed their first daughter, Haley. Christina proved herself to be a magnificent mother from day one, as if her entire previous life had been spent preparing for motherhood. The first child is a complete restructuring of young parents' lives. Now they were forced to fully orient themselves to the needs and desires of their little one, rather than following their own habits. For many, this process doesn't go so smoothly. However, for Christina, the transition to motherhood came naturally. Haley became her whole world. Christy was ready to do everything possible and impossible to ensure her child's well-being, to give her the best life and care. In May 2014, the Harris family was expecting another addition. They named their second daughter Kaylee. More than anything in the world, Christy loved her girls. She was devoted to them until the very end. And it turned out that her dedication and efforts in caring for the newborn ultimately became important key evidence in this case. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. Let's move forward a few months to September 2014. Christy had given birth to her daughter via C-section. By this time, the woman had already returned to work but still continued to breastfeed, believing it helped strengthen the baby's health. This is why she constantly had to spend hours pumping and storing enough milk so that whoever was watching Kaylee could feed her on time while Christy was at work. Pumping is a rather laborious process that takes a lot of time. Christy strictly adhered to a pumping schedule and was very meticulous in creating labels for marking bottles. She vigilantly monitored what she ate and drank, knowing it would affect the quality and quantity of breast milk and, ultimately, the child's health. All this is not random information. It later had enormous significance for understanding the case. The Harrises lived in their own house in Davison, Michigan, and although neighbors and loved ones knew their marriage was going through difficult times, they all noted that Christy never gave up and continued to be a devoted mother to her children. She was described as a responsible and kind-hearted person who greeted everyone with a smile and was always ready to lend a helping hand. September 29, 2014, began like a typical morning. Jason took the older Haley to preschool and 4-month-old Kaylee to his wife's parents. Christy was supposed to be getting ready for work at this time, but she continued to lie in bed, and Jason knew about this. He just didn't want other people to know that he was aware of what was happening. It wasn't long before Harris began to implement his devious plan. First, the man wrote to a neighbor that he had been unable to contact Christy all morning. He asked his wife in a text message if she had woken up, but received no response. Perhaps she had overslept, not hearing the alarm because a couple of days before this she had been feeling a bit under the weather. Now the loving husband was worried if everything was all right there. However, Jason was little concerned about what psychological trauma the neighbor would experience when entering their family home. The kind woman, of course, offered to immediately go to the Harris residence to find out why Christina wasn't responding to her husband's calls and messages. The neighbor didn't even realize what a horrific scene she was about to witness. She found Christy lying in her bed. The homeowner was cold to the touch, and white foam had settled on her lips. The distressed neighbor rushed to the phone and immediately called the emergency service 911, then dialed the number of another neighbor who was a certified nurse, asking her to urgently come to the Harris house. Unfortunately, the second woman only confirmed what could be guessed at first glance. Christy Harris had left this world, and no life-saving measures would bring her back. This was the conclusion reached by the emergency response team as soon as they arrived at the house. They pronounced the homeowner dead and conducted a very brief and fruitless investigation. There were no suspicious details at the scene, no signs of struggle, no weapons, no signs of forced entry. Nothing that could indicate a potential cause of Christina's death, except for some painkillers prescribed to her after the C-section. The pills were on the bedside table. Everything else looked as if a completely healthy 36-year-old woman had just died in her sleep. Such an outcome, of course, is quite possible, but in very, very rare cases. The only small clue, which at first wasn't even considered a clue, was that Christina had died with foam in her mouth. This could have been an overdose of an unknown substance, but only a pathologist could determine that for sure. At the first stage, it was believed that the mother of two had died in her sleep. When the body was taken for medical examination, Christie's loved ones remained at the scene, at the Harris residence, still unable to comprehend and accept the monstrous news. They wondered what could have happened. The tragedy shocked everyone. Christina had always been completely healthy and felt fine the day before, had no pre-existing conditions or anything like that that could explain the sudden death. Her unexpected passing caused a lot of speculation and assumptions among relatives, but Jason Harris outdid them all. The man suddenly told the police that the previous evening Christie had been acting a bit strange. For dinner, he had prepared her a bowl of cereal with milk after she complained of being hungry. But she ate almost nothing as she fell asleep right at the table, dropping her spoon. Jason had to carry her to the bedroom, where she slept all night. Apparently, she was still feeling unwell. The man stated that a couple of days ago, Christie had been slightly ill. According to her spouse, he had the impression that his wife was fine when he was getting ready for work and dressing the children for daycare that morning. This concluded his conversation with the police. He wasn't called for further questioning, and absolutely nothing followed that could reveal the true cause of the young woman's sudden death. If the investigators had exercised due diligence and actually spoken with Jason or other neighbors again, they would have easily determined that there was a culprit in this tragedy. They would have, at least, been able to gather evidence, particularly the bowl of cereal, or even search the house. But the detectives did none of the above. They simply believed Jason's account. However, his words at the police station and those said to neighbors differed greatly. On that very morning when Christina was found dead in her bed, her husband was talking to residents of nearby houses and complaining that his wife wasn't the angel her parents thought she was, and sometimes dabbled in illicit substances. He made various slanderous statements that didn't correspond to reality. Yet his behavior could have served as a red flag, literally screaming that something wasn't right here. It was too bold and disrespectful to speak about his spouse in such a manner when she had passed away just a couple of hours ago. There was no sense in running to the nearest neighbors and telling tall tales, but Jason was so reckless and overconfident that he sincerely believed he would get away with everything. On October 22, 2014, the police received the autopsy results. It showed that Christie died due to the effects of a psychoactive drug. The pathologist also found that the substance was taken orally. However, this drug isn't typically consumed by swallowing. Yet the medical examiner somehow didn't consider the fact that in Christie's case, the powder entered her system through the mouth, and the woman's death was ruled an accidental overdose. The pathologist assumed that Christina deliberately used mind-altering substances. Even after her family contacted the police to state that Christie never had any addictions, especially during the time she was pumping breast milk for her daughter, the authorities did nothing about it. For several years, the sudden death of 36-year-old mother of two, Christina Harris, officially remained an accidental overdose. The initial investigation into the young woman's death proceeded relatively slowly, as the police had no serious reasons. If it was an unintentional loss of life, there was no point in allocating resources, and determining the circumstances of Christie's death didn't become a priority for detectives. Jason Harris, being a widower, could freely enjoy his life, which he did. It turned out that less than a month after his wife's funeral, the man brought a new woman into the house, who began living with him and his children. In fact, before marrying Christie, Jason had already been married, and he had 2 children from that relationship. Now, the man gained full custody of his daughters, in addition to partial custody of the children from his first marriage. His life quickly returned to normal, and his financial situation significantly improved. Harris received over $120,000 from a life insurance policy, paid off some debts, bought 2 cars for himself and his new girlfriend, and even purchased a brand new house. All his actions caused incredible fury in Christie's family. The deceased relatives had a gut feeling that Jason had something to do with his wife's death. Christie's mother, Kathy, had long considered her daughter's marriage unsuccessful. She had repeatedly suggested that she divorce her selfish husband. But Christie, like most women, believed that girls needed a father. Kathy also insisted that she had seen her daughter the day before her death. Contrary to Jason's statement, She wasn't sick at all and felt fine. For her parents, sisters, and friends, Christy's death was a tragedy. They lost a close and beloved person. Harris, on the other hand, gained a lot after her death, not to mention a new girlfriend. The widower was living a completely new life. He had a lot of money at his disposal and no longer mentioned the wife who had departed so suddenly. For most people, the death of a loved one is usually associated with days of mourning and prolonged depression. But Jason behaved as if he had buried a hamster or a parakeet, not his beloved wife and the mother of his children. In reality, Christina's relatives knew her marriage was in trouble, and her death came at a very convenient time for Jason. The woman had repeatedly complained to her close ones that her husband was cheating on her. It turned out that while she was undergoing a C-section, which is a serious operation requiring long recovery, Harris was sitting in the next room texting his mistress, at the very moment when his wife was suffering, giving life to his second daughter. Additionally, Christy once casually told a friend that if anything happened to her, her husband should be checked first. And Jason himself, whose self-importance was off the charts, not only said nasty things about his deceased wife, but also directly admitted to his colleagues that he wanted to get rid of her. Just before Christy's death, Jason openly asked his brother for a loan to buy a plane ticket. He was planning to visit his mistress and didn't hide it. Once at work, Jason inquired with colleagues about tasteless and odorless drugs capable of knocking someone out permanently. He recounted how he once secretly dissolved several sedative pills in a glass of water and offered it to his wife. But Christy tasted the bitterness and poured the water into the sink, so his plan didn't work. Then Jason decided to hire a hitman to do the job for him. The unfaithful husband even paid $5,000 for the service. However, the executor was arrested on another case, and the plan failed again. Harris had the audacity to suggest to his colleagues that one of them act as a mercenary. He promised to pay $10,000 after receiving Christy's life insurance. What's most surprising in this story is that the colleagues who so calmly discussed the plan of a real crime with Harris didn't even think to go to the police. This could have saved the life of a mother of two. Did they believe what Jason was saying? Or did they just consider his plans foolish, boasting not worth worrying about? Even his own sister Rachel didn't immediately report to the police when Jason let slip a year before the tragedy that he considered liquidating Christy the only way out of the marriage. Harris justified this by saying he didn't want to pay alimony. He had already divorced his first wife and now had to give part of his salary to her. He didn't want to get into this bondage again. The man even told his sister about his step-by-step plan for how he intended to send his second wife to the other world. Rachel stayed silent then, only sharing the information with another brother, Jeff, and a day later called him back saying Jason was joking. Yet she had the opportunity to prevent the crime and thereby save not only Christy but also her own brother from prison, because subsequently he did carry out the terrible plan. It turns out that many people knew about the planned crime, but no one said anything to anyone. This inaction is shocking and makes one lose faith in humanity. Jason's reason for treating his wife this way was that, according to him, Christy was lazy and did nothing around the house. Instead, she constantly nagged him about insignificant trifles. He also doubted whether he was the father of their second daughter. On the very morning when Christy was found dead, the grief-stricken husband called her employer and asked about life insurance money. A week later, he showed up at their office to inquire again. Harris' actions clearly indicated a lack of basic logic in his head, which ultimately helped solve this case. He didn't want to pay alimony to support his children after a divorce, but in the end, custody of them fell entirely on his shoulders. After receiving a $100,000 life insurance policy from Christy's employers and an additional $20,000 from his own job, he secured himself a couple of years of comfortable existence if managed correctly, but didn't consider that if his wife were alive, they would have earned more money as a family, so mathematics wasn't his strong suit either. However, all this would surface a bit later, while for now, Harris was happy that he had gained freedom and financial independence. He calmly arranged his life with a new girlfriend and thought he had brilliantly pulled off the operation to get rid of his annoying wife. However, Christie's family was relentless in their pursuit of justice. They were almost 100% sure that Jason had a hand in their daughter's and sister's death. But unfortunately, they couldn't prove it. They had no choice but to wait for the man to make a mistake. Although the police ruled Christie's death an accidental overdose and were in no hurry to investigate the causes, her parents hoped they could achieve vengeance for their daughter's death. From the day of her death, and in the following weeks, months, and years, they adhered to a certain tactic. Mom, stepfather, and sisters did everything possible to lull their former son-in-law into a false sense of security. They decided to maintain good relations with Jason because Christie's daughters were under his care. The grandparents now feared for their safety. They didn't know what else this man was capable of. By pretending that everything was fine and they hadn't figured anything out, Christie's close ones could remain as close as possible to their granddaughters. They cared for the girls' well-being and had to pretend in front of Jason for years. In reality, the deceased woman's parents remained in contact with the police all this time. Christie's mom, Kathy, emailed the detectives almost every day, reminding them that the case wasn't over yet. Her daughter still needed justice. She knew from the investigators that they entertained the idea of Jason's guilt, but until specific evidence was found, they couldn't do anything. It turned out that the police had shifted their work onto the shoulders of the victim's parents, and the family did everything to obtain this evidence because they themselves were tired of smiling at their former son-in-law and pretending that everything was wonderful. Christie's stepfather Jim was well versed in computers. One day, Jason complained that his home computer wasn't working. Jim gladly agreed to help his son-in-law with the problem, thus gaining access to the hard drive. There he found an image that was crucial to the investigation of Christie's death. It was a photo of Jason holding something like a tray on his lap. In his hand, he was clutching a glass tube. On the tray, there were clearly visible lines of a white powdery substance. To anyone, even an uninitiated person, it became clear what Harris was doing. Not only was the image quite compromising, but it also showed that Jason was not just a user of psychoactive substances, but had direct access to the type of drug found in Christie's system. Naturally, Jim brought this evidence directly to the police. The detectives dug a little into Harris' past and discovered some very interesting information. Just a few months after his wife's death, Jason was fired from his job for failing a drug test. The police also spoke with Harris' colleagues and learned that the man had long been having strange conversations about getting rid of his own wife. Only for some reason, no one took them seriously. Or perhaps the colleagues were afraid that they themselves would be implicated in concealing a crime and pretended not to believe his ravings. Evidence began to accumulate, and it seemed that the case was moving forward. Unfortunately, it was then that Jason sensed something was being plotted against him, so he turned to a lawyer and refused to answer police questions. Yes, this photograph was compromising, and the colleagues' testimonies were incriminating. But obviously, this wasn't enough to make an arrest and bring charges for the murder of his wife. And for the next 2 agonizing years, nothing happened. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video. It's really important. During this time, Christie's mother, Kathy, diligently sought ways to achieve justice for her daughter, ways to somehow hold Jason accountable. In her research, the woman found out what they needed to do. Instead of pursuing criminal charges against their former son-in-law, the parents planned to file a civil wrongful death lawsuit. Kathy and Jim decided that this lawsuit would be the only way to draw attention to the case and help the family take some action against the alleged perpetrator. They hired a lawyer. As soon as the lawyer heard the details of this case, he was shocked that Harris was still free. The lawyer identified many reasons why the investigation should have started immediately. But the most important and obvious reason was that the drug that took Christie's life was taken orally. If she had been using it regularly, as her husband Jason claimed, she would surely have known the correct ways to take it. The family was lucky that the lawyer literally latched onto the case, and this lawsuit really helped them move in the right direction. Although Harris could hide behind a lawyer and remain silent during the criminal investigation, he still had to speak under oath while testifying in the civil lawsuit. He had to answer again the questions that were initially asked on the day of his wife's death. Did Jason cheat on his wife? Did he use illegal substances himself? Did he text Christy that morning to find out if she was awake? And the answers looked quite dubious. This man had never before inquired if his wife was all right. So what could have happened that morning that suddenly concerned him? Was she awake, and would she be late for work? It further emerged that Jason had slept in another room that night, although he told the court he had slept in the marital bed. Photos from the scene showed that the sheet on his side of the bed wasn't even wrinkled. And this was another small lie that Harris was passing off as truth for some reason. It was these minor inconsistencies that revealed a troubling picture of that morning and made detectives ask more and more questions. The compromising photo from the hard drive, where Jason held a tray with white powder on his lap, was explained by the man so stupidly that it became clear to anyone that he was lying. Harris explained to the police that he did this only to show his daughters how bad it was to use illegal substances. An interesting parenting technique, isn't it? Jason didn't expect the police to have such frank evidence of his harmful habits. At that moment, he began to realize that the walls around him were crumbling, and soon the detectives would dig up the truth. It was only a matter of time. His body language during interrogations indicated that he well understood the gravity of his situation. If at the very beginning Harris sat up straight and answered questions with slight carelessness, now he was hunched over and holding his head in his hands. There was no trace of his initial bravado left. The compromising photo and the testimony of colleagues led to the jury ultimately finding Jason Harris guilty of his wife Christy's death in the civil wrongful death lawsuit and ordered him to pay his wife's family $2 million. What contributed most to this was not so much the testimony and the photo of Harris having fun, but Christy's breast milk, which was accidentally preserved in the refrigerator. When Christina passed away, she had over 50 bags of breast milk left in her freezer. On each one, she had meticulously written the time and date of expression by hand. These packets of frozen milk became a crucial piece of evidence in the Harris family case. The mother and stepfather had been prudent in preserving it, knowing that analysis of this milk would reveal the true picture of events. A nursing mother wouldn't intentionally consume prohibited substances, as they would appear in her breast milk. This proved that Christy wasn't dependent on controlled substances and would never take them, as she could harm her own daughter. Christy loved her girls more than life itself. Thanks to the hours spent expressing breast milk, she managed to achieve justice even from beyond the grave. In fact, authorities immediately tested the milk for prohibited substances after the woman's death, as it was important evidence. They checked and found no traces of drugs but took no further action. The case was handled by a young police investigator. It was his first crime involving a person's death. He was inexperienced, overwhelmed, and overlooked things. More seasoned detectives were busy with other cases, so they didn't bother investigating why a young woman had died. As a result, Christy's family spent 2 years convincing local authorities to bring in state investigators. The Michigan State Police took on Christina Harris' case in 2016. However, they also made little progress until 2018, when the civil case was in full swing. A retest of the breast milk was conducted, again showing that Christy hadn't used prohibited substances for several weeks or even months prior to her death. This examination, combined with witness testimonies, made its impact. The deceased young woman's parents won the civil lawsuit, requiring the former son-in-law to pay $2 million. But this wasn't enough, because Jason was still free while their daughter lay in the ground. Jason hoped to relax after the stressful trial. Yes, he now owed a lot of money, but he'd avoided imprisonment. Fortunately, his relief was short-lived because in 2019, the medical examiner amended the cause of death on Christina's death certificate. Now, instead of accidental overdose, it stated intentional homicide. This change served as the basis for a criminal investigation into the crime. Investigators utilized the same evidence indicating Christy's death was violent: the breast milk, Jason's incriminating photo, and his colleagues' statements. They were confident they now had sufficient means to secure a conviction, so they made an arrest. The county prosecutor stated that Christa's husband, Jason, had a history of encounters with other women outside their marriage. Jason had repeatedly told his co-workers about this. He wanted his wife to disappear and even hired a hitman. While the hired killer was surveilling the target, police caught him with a firearm, which was prohibited for someone recently released from prison on parole. The would-be assassin was sent back to serve his sentence. It was then that Jason decided to take matters into his own hands. He first tried to find someone among his colleagues to carry out the act, but they refused. So he resolved to act independently. One evening, when Christy was tired after work and sat down for dinner, her spouse indeed prepared cereal with milk for her. However, before serving, he dissolved a considerable amount of a white substance in the milk, an overdose of which caused her sudden death. Experts confirmed that the milk masked the taste of the drug in the cereal, so Christy didn't detect it. The method of ingestion was oral, as Jason had no other way to make his wife take a large dose of the prohibited substance. Apparently, the powder's effects overtook Christy right at the table. She couldn't even hold her spoon. Jason, knowing what was happening, simply carried her to the bedroom for her to fall asleep forever. He intentionally didn't lie down next to her to avoid waking up in bed with his dead wife. The preliminary hearing took place in August 2019, during which the judge heard numerous incriminating testimonies, including those from Jason's own brother Jeff. It turned out that Jeff had supported Christy's family from day one, and he told them about Jason's desire to get rid of her. The fact that Jason was his biological brother didn't prevent the man from revealing the truth. A former colleague of Jason's also testified, describing the hitman and Jason's intentions to remove his wife to avoid paying alimony in a divorce. In Jason's view, Christina didn't want to return to work. She just lounged at home and did nothing. She was always expressing milk for some reason, even though baby formula had long been invented. Moreover, he wasn't sure of his paternity regarding the second girl, and overall, he was simply tired of his wife. All this served as evidence for the prosecution, strengthening their arguments. The actual trial began in November 2021. Jason faced 3 charges in total: first-degree felony, incitement to commit a felony, and use of a controlled substance resulting in death. The defense tried to prove that Christy was drug-dependent and knowingly took the substance. But the evidence refuting this was too compelling. Medical records, workplace tests, and the breast milk itself showed that Christy wasn't using the powder, as it would have risked her daughter's life. Despite the lawyer's efforts, he couldn't portray the victim in a negative light. Jason sat with his head down, looking very unwell, especially after the prosecution presented his motive. The man who sent his wife to the afterlife didn't expect his crime would ever be uncovered, let alone with such detail. The only thing not discussed in court was where Jason obtained the white powder, but judging by the photo of him sitting with a tray and straw, he had ways of acquiring it. When Jason stood trial, he stubbornly insisted on his innocence and denied all evidence, though it was foolish to deny such obvious facts. On November 17, 2021, the jury found Jason Harris guilty on all 3 counts, and the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge couldn't contain himself when it came to expressing personal opinions on all matters. He stated that while justice may have been delayed, it had now prevailed. The judge called Jason a selfish murderer and a lying monster who sacrificed not only his wife but also his daughters, taking away their mother and leaving them orphaned. Christy's family could finally breathe. They admitted that over the years, they had moments of doubt when it seemed Jason would get away with it. But the life sentence was worth all the struggle they had to endure. Although it won't bring back the mother to those poor girls or the daughter to her parents, the person who took Christy's life will rot in prison until his own death. The deceased's family will always carry this pain because Jason doesn't allow them to find peace. He has filed an appeal against his sentence. The appeal was rejected and the sentence upheld in January 2024. But Jason isn't giving up and plans to continue his attempts. Each time he does this, Christy's loved ones have to relive all the heartbreaking moments. Christina Harris' family did an amazing job questioning the accident, as it was initially determined. They fought for justice, and ultimately achieved it. It might seem like everything ended wonderfully. However, the fight for justice shouldn't be the responsibility of the victim's family, and that's what's most upsetting about this story. All individuals are equal. The distinction lies not in birth, but solely in their actions. Inside, we are all the same. Does a woman who earns money by dancing in a strip club have a right to live? Is D'Alembert correct in stating that true equality of citizens consists in their being equally subject to the laws? On February 7th, 2023, an individual was strolling in an area near Flamingo Lakes and Highway 149 in Sam Houston National Forest in Montgomery County, Texas. Unexpectedly, their attention was drawn to a torn garbage bag, from which, according to the witness, human skeletal remains protruded. Shortly after, it was discovered that this was the upper part of a torso. Judging by the size, the body fragment belonged to a young woman. The police immediately had an idea about whose remains were found in the forest. Officers were so confident in their assumptions that even without waiting for the pathologist's conclusion and DNA tests, they contacted the Johnson family to inform them of the discovery. A year earlier, a young woman named Felicia Johnson from San Diego had come to Houston to celebrate her 24th birthday. No one had seen her since. The girl's blood-stained mobile phone and other personal belongings were found in a wooded area, but Felicia herself was nowhere to be found, nor were there any clues indicating her whereabouts. Felicia Marie Johnson, known on social media as Fivia Marie, was the eldest of 3 children. Her parents divorced, and all the kids remained in the care of their father, Kevin. The man struggled to handle the teenagers, so he soon married a woman named Myra. In appearance and character, Felicia was an exact copy of her paternal grandmother, just as sweet, kind, and smiley. She matured early. Her feminine figure attracted men's attention when Felicia was still a teenager, and as an adult, she decided she could earn good money with her looks. Social media became her personal portfolio. The young woman meticulously cared for her face, hair, and body to appear most presentable in photos. Felicia dreamed of a glamorous life and tried to conform to accepted standards. Long, wavy hair, fluffy lashes, sharply defined eyebrows. She danced and aspired to a modeling career. Unfortunately, while most young girls dream of modeling, only a few achieve this goal. Felicia was in the majority. But despite this, she didn't lose hope and continued to apply to various modeling agencies. The Johnson family lived in San Diego, California. Recently, Felicia celebrated her 24th birthday and decided to treat herself to a trip to Houston, Texas. She wanted the celebration to continue. For any girl, 24 is one of the best ages. You're already of legal age, an adult, in charge of your own life, and at the same time, you're still at an age where you can chalk up your mistakes to youth. Felicia spent a long time preparing for her celebratory trip to another city. She got a beautiful manicure, picked out outfits, and packed her things in advance. The young woman decided that if she found work in Houston, she could stay there longer. In general, she had many plans for this small journey, but it ended quite differently from what Felicia Johnson had planned. Her life would come to a halt at this magical number of 24 years. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. Harris, Houston, the city the young woman had long wanted to visit, a city of new opportunities. Throughout her time there, Felicia kept in touch with her family, friends, and all who loved her. She called for every reason, enthusing about the trip and sharing her impressions. But on Friday, April 15th, 2022, the calls abruptly stopped. The girl wasn't responding to messages, and even more strangely, wasn't appearing on social media. Previously, not a day went by without Fivia Marie posting a new photo on her page, especially from a trip to another city. But that evening, there was no word from her. Her loved ones grew worried. Felicia had simply gone silent without explanation. This was an alarming sign, as the girl knew how anxious her father became when she wasn't around, yet she still didn't make contact. She stopped communicating on Friday evening, and by Saturday, when Johnson still hadn't surfaced, her loved ones were gripped by real panic. The family independently hired a private detective. The investigator quickly established the location of Felicia's mobile phone and went to that place to try to find the gadget. It was a park called Bear Creek, a wooded area in Houston, just a few miles from where the girl was allegedly last seen. The phone was found near the park, lying on the roadside and smeared with blood. This discovery certainly didn't inspire confidence that Felicia was all right. The girl's father, Kevin, was in San Diego. As soon as the man realized something had happened to his daughter, he immediately boarded a plane and headed to Houston to find his girl. He couldn't sit at home and wait while his daughter was in danger. First thing, Kevin went to the police and filed a missing person report. In Kevin's opinion, the law enforcement officers initially didn't take the information seriously. As soon as they learned that Felicia was a girl of a different skin color, they accepted the report, but were in no hurry to take any search attempts. The first place they finally decided to search was Bear Creek Park, as that's where the girl's mobile phone was found. It was a doomed endeavor from the start. A vast area, overgrown with forest. Some areas were completely impassable. Roads meandered among the trees, leading in different directions. It was unknown where Felicia might have been heading to or from, or how her phone ended up here. Maybe it was thrown from a car, since it was found near the road. Searching for the girl, possibly not alive, in Bear Creek Park was like looking for a needle in a haystack. The task was complicated by the decision to conduct the operation without attracting outside attention. Detectives supposed that the person responsible for Felicia's disappearance could be a local resident and somehow interfere with the investigation. That's why they wanted to keep people unaware of the search activities. The number of people in the search group sent to Bear Creek was clearly insufficient, and those who were there didn't show much enthusiasm. The organizer of the squad stated that they were almost certain they wouldn't find anyone. Of course, they wished to be wrong in their assumptions, but in the end, Felicia Johnson, neither alive nor dead, was not found in the park area. It was very difficult for the girl's family to accept the first defeat in the search, but Kevin wasn't going to give up. The man declared that he would do everything possible and impossible to get his daughter back home, and he wouldn't rest until that day came. At his initiative, flyers with several photos of Felicia were printed and posted throughout Bear Creek Park, so that anyone passing by would know this girl was being sought. The flyers, besides photos, included a description of the missing person. A dark-skinned Latina, long black hair and brown eyes, about 5 feet 5 inches tall, weighing 68 kilograms, with a tattoo of roses and butterflies on her right shoulder. Local residents and park visitors studied the information on the flyers and indeed joined the search. Now they weren't just walking in the forest, but trying to pay attention to suspicious piles of fallen branches, looking into pits and ravines. The entire local community was searching for the missing girl. Special volunteer groups were created. Eventually, even the FBI got involved in the case. This happened after social activist and leader of the new Black Panther Nation, Quanell X, raised a wave of public indignation, concerned that in Houston over the past 5 months, 4 dark-skinned girls who had been attempted to be involved in the intimate services industry had already gone missing. All 4 were found dead, and in each of these cases, the authorities deliberately delayed the investigation. To the horror of community members, Felicia could become the 5th victim on this list. At a press conference on April 20th, Quanell X called on the Houston community to stand up for Felicia and help investigate her mysterious disappearance. The police began to take some real measures to search for the girl only after the activist's speech. However, despite all the actions taken in this area, the only thing found was Felicia's purse. Now, in addition to the search operation in Bear Creek Park, the police decided to talk to the girl's friends and family, those who knew and loved Felicia, and communicated with her in the days preceding her disappearance. Detectives wanted to create a timeline and see where else they should look. From conversations with these people, it was revealed that Felicia, while in Houston, decided to combine business with pleasure and try to earn some money. The girl told friends in messages that she had found an adult entertainment club called Cover Girls, located in the northwest part of Houston. She had signed up for an interview there as a dancer, but was rejected. After leaving the club, Felicia ordered a taxi to get to the hotel where she had been staying all this time. After the club, her trail went cold. However, this was a very good lead. The Johnson family and social activist Quanell X, who was helping them in the search, believed that Felicia's disappearance was somehow connected to this nightclub. Kevin even suggested that his daughter had somehow gotten into a situation related to human trafficking for intimate services. As practice showed, out-of-town girls were kidnapped and forced to sell their bodies. Kevin had no concrete evidence, but deep down he felt that the strip club had something to do with it. In fact, the man just wanted to believe that his girl was alive, that she had gotten into a difficult situation from which she couldn't get out on her own, and he was ready to find her at all costs. Detectives also adhered to a similar version, as if Felicia had been kidnapped and held against her will. Therefore, they also hoped to find her alive. The authorities assumed that where she was being held there might be a TV or radio, so they asked Kevin Johnson to make a statement and address his daughter. It was a way to talk to her and let her know she was being searched for. Such an appeal could help the girl stay strong and not lose hope. In addition, Kevin Johnson's appearance on TV screens was aimed at reaching out to caring people who had seen or known something but were hiding it from the police. The man said that all friends and loved ones love Felicia, miss her, and mention her daily in their prayers. He asked his daughter not to lose hope for rescue and promised that he would not rest until he brought her home. The father also addressed the kidnappers, stating that the family would never stop, and he personally would begin to hunt for the person holding Felicia captive. In fact, Kevin and his entire family felt that they were the only ones concerned about their daughter's fate. They were sure that the police were not doing their job as they should, because everything that somehow moved the investigation forward was not done by law enforcement officers. The missing girl's mobile phone was found by a private detective. Her purse was discovered by a group of volunteers. Even now, it was not the Houston Police Department addressing the public, but Felicia's father. And this state of affairs caused Kevin even more negative feelings. 2 weeks after Felicia went missing, her family, friends, and concerned individuals who cared about the girl's fate gathered near the city administration, hoping to draw the mayor's attention to Felicia's case and how law enforcement was conducting the investigation. Kevin knew he couldn't handle it alone in a foreign city and called for support from the authorities. He had many questions for the police, but no answers. For example, the distraught father knew that detectives had the opportunity to obtain surveillance camera footage from the nightclub where his daughter was last seen. But for some reason, they either didn't request them or simply didn't want to show them to the Johnson family. It's unknown how successful this action was in attracting the attention of Houston's mayor, but they did manage to pique the interest of Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. The woman helped ensure that the police would take this case more seriously. The Congresswoman also promised to obtain surveillance camera footage from the club for the family, if any existed. Sheila Jackson Lee stated that Felicia came to Houston as a guest, and they were obligated to ensure her safety. Kevin Johnson thought that if he could view the surveillance camera footage from the club, he would understand what happened to his daughter and see who was involved in her disappearance. But everything turned out to be much more complicated than the man thought. The management of the Cover Girls Entertainment nightclub initially told the police that they didn't remember if Felicia Johnson had come for an interview. At least, there was no documentary evidence of this. The girl hadn't filled out a dancer's application or left any statements. Later, it was revealed that the club only had internal surveillance cameras, recordings from which were handed over to detectives. They showed that Felicia did inquire about the vacancy, but the manager refused to hire her, after which she went outside and began calling a taxi. The girl's friends, with whom she had been messaging that day, also reported this to the police. So essentially, these recordings didn't provide any new information. It was only reassuring that the club wasn't involved in her disappearance. The behavior of the nightclub management raised suspicions with the Johnson family because they thought the club wasn't cooperating with the police. Although in reality, This opinion arose due to the lack of communication between the authorities and Felicia's father. The detectives simply didn't think it necessary to inform the missing girl's father about the progress of the investigation. It turned out that the nightclub wasn't the last place Felicia was seen. On April 16th, around 3 a.m., she returned to her hotel room located in the Houston Medical Center, and that's where she was last seen. The police were able to track Felicia's movements and find out what she was doing, who she was communicating with, and where she went after the hotel. After being rejected at the entertainment club, Felicia called a taxi. For some reason, the car was delayed. An unknown man offered to give her a ride to the hotel. After some consideration, she agreed. During the ride, the young people got acquainted and talked. The driver's name was Chukwuebuka Nwobodo. He was 28 years old, and he had come to the States from Nigeria. In reality, this guy grew up in Houston, went to school here in the Fort Bend district, and got a job here. So only his name gave away his Nigerian heritage. After parting, they continued their communication on Snapchat, where they arranged to meet the next morning. According to messages, Chukwuebuka offered the girl $500 for intimate services, and she agreed. After this, no one saw Felicia again. There was no activity on her mobile phone or social media, no credit card transactions. She seemed to vanish from the face of the earth. Now it became clear why the authorities didn't show much enthusiasm in the investigation. The life of an African-American woman who agreed to meet a man for money probably didn't seem valuable in their eyes. How else to explain the police's further actions? Detectives were able to determine that Felicia took a taxi from the hotel, which Chukwuebuka had ordered for her. The car took the girl to a residential complex on Windchase Boulevard, after which the man, in his own car with Felicia, went to his apartment on South Richmond Avenue. An hour later, Chukwuebuka's car was seen leaving the yard, and around the same time, Felicia's phone was pinged on a cell tower near Bear Creek Park, where it was later found. The police believed that night the man disposed of the girl at his home, then got rid of the mobile phone and purse by throwing them in the park area. Apparently, Felicia resisted, as that morning Chukwuebuka was captured on surveillance cameras in a home goods store, and his right hand was bandaged. The footage shows him with a bandaged hand buying garbage bags, gloves, a flashlight, a shovel, an electric kitchen saw, and a towel. This was on April 16th, and on April 17th, he went to a local clinic about a cut. So he didn't dispose of the girl's body immediately, but only after a few days. He dismembered her body to make it easier to hide. After the police found out that Chukwuebuka had ordered a taxi for Felicia Johnson, he became the #1 suspect. Later, detectives were able to view the search queries on his mobile phone, and it was horrifying. The man was searching the internet for how to become a serial maniac, whether bleach can destroy DNA, the most wooded part of Houston, how to avoid punishment for crimes, and more. Also, one of the searches included information on the 15 cheapest places to live for about $1,000. This meant Chukwuebuka was planning to flee in advance. So the attack on the young woman was premeditated, and that woman turned out to be Felicia Johnson. On May 13th, 2022, the police had an opportunity to take Chukwuebuka into custody, but they didn't do it. However, after this, the missing person case was changed to a criminal investigation. Even though the body was never found, the authorities believed the girl was dead. This was all very difficult for Felicia's father to accept. He didn't want to acknowledge that his daughter was no longer alive until the very end. Kevin tried his best to keep himself together and not break down. However, the inaction of law enforcement undermined his faith in a favorable outcome of the case. On May 13th, Chukwuebuka was arrested for a traffic violation. This happened a month after Felicia's disappearance. They confiscated his phone and searched his car, after which they released him without charging him with a crime against Felicia. In Chukwuebuka's car, they found a 9mm pistol, cleaning supplies, a whole bunch of latex gloves, a shovel, and the like. Dried bloodstains were found on the back seat and in the trunk, which were taken for analysis. As the authorities explained, They didn't have enough evidence to bring charges against Chukwuebuka, so they simply detained him, interrogated him, and released him. But before that, they took his mobile phone for examination. They also had a warrant to search his apartment, but the suspect wasn't planning to return home. As soon as he was released from the police station, Chukwuebuka disappeared in an unknown direction. Meanwhile, the police examined his mobile phone and searched his apartment, and this investigation revealed the bitter truth. Obvious bloodstains were found in the suspect's apartment. Most of it was on the floor, in the bedroom, and in the hallway. Forensic examination confirmed that the blood belonged to Felicia Johnson. After such a huge blood loss, the probability that the girl would be found alive was, unfortunately, non-existent. Checking Chukwuebuka's mobile phone revealed an even more horrific picture. Photos of several deceased female bodies were found in the gallery. One body was dismembered and photographed. No confirmation that the photo depicted Felicia Johnson was found. However, given the condition in which her remains were found a year later, such a possibility can't be ruled out. No specific information about the bodies in these photos was also revealed. These women were not identified. There was no metadata associated with the images. However, detectives found materials from one case in which Chukwuebuka was accused of harassment. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video. It's really important. It turns out that a few years earlier, a woman had reported to the police that she was attacked by a man. He tried to force her into sexual intercourse right in his car. By resisting, the woman was able to escape from the car. The assailant tried to chase her, but she managed to hide. So the victim got away with just fear and emotional distress. The attacker's name was Chukwuebuka Nwobodo. The problem was that later she didn't want to cooperate. The woman told the police that everything she had said earlier was untrue and that there had been no violence against her. The complainant, without explanation, said she didn't want to press charges against Chukwuebuka. The police didn't investigate why this happened, but the fact remains. The suspect in Felicia Johnson's death had previous instances of attacking women. The blood of the missing girl in Chukwuebuka's apartment, the photo of a dismembered body on his mobile phone, and other irrefutable evidence surfaced at the moment when the man had already been released without any charges. If law enforcement actions had been more coordinated, the perpetrator would already be behind bars. As soon as the police realized their mistake in releasing Chukwuebuka, they quickly brought charges against him in light of the newly discovered circumstances. This happened in June 2022. He was accused of killing Felicia Johnson, as well as tampering with evidence. Unfortunately, finding him just as quickly wasn't possible. On one hand, this was a real step in the investigation. On the other, the charges against Chukwuebuka destroyed the Johnson family's hopes of finding their daughter alive. They still wanted to believe that the girl had gotten into serious trouble, but that they would be able to see and hug her someday. At that time, social activist Quanell X made a statement to the public, saying that Felicia's case was a warning to all young women, regardless of their skin color, about how quickly their lives could be cut short. She called on people to look around and see if there was anyone in their surroundings who could so easily steal a life like Felicia's. After all, only through joint efforts can this wave of violence against women be stopped. A reward was offered for any information that would lead to Chukwuebuka's arrest. Loved ones managed to collect $5,000 in hopes that someone would report the whereabouts of the criminal suspected of killing Felicia. Vigils were also held in honor of the deceased girl both in San Diego, where she was from, and in Bear Creek Park, where her belongings were found. People prayed and remembered what a wonderful person she was. Witty and cheerful, Felicia had many friends not only on social media but also in real life in California. For most, it was a real shock to learn that their friend had disappeared somewhere in Houston, and they would never laugh at her jokes together again. Many felt a sense of hopelessness and grief. The vigils and prayers were meant to help people cope with their grief, uniting to come to terms with the loss through joint efforts. It was very important for Felicia's family to know that she was loved not only by her close ones, but by many other people as well. They all prayed that the girl would be found soon and buried properly. The Johnson family had to live in a state of constant waiting for a whole year. Felicia disappeared in April 2022, and her remains were only found in February 2023. When the police received a report of human bones found in Sam Houston National Forest, detectives immediately thought it was Felicia Johnson. However, an examination was first needed to identify the body through dental records. But the officers didn't wait and immediately called the girl's father, Kevin, to inform him that they might have found his daughter. This confidence was due to the location where the skeletal remains were found, the degree of decomposition, and some jewelry that remained on Felicia. Despite the fact that it had not yet been confirmed that it was Kevin's daughter who was found, the man took this news as a blessing from above. It was very hard to wake up every day knowing that Felicia was not alive, but it was even harder to know that she wasn't even given a proper burial. Now he could bring her home and lay her to rest as she deserved. This entire situation with the discovery of a body found in the forest proved shocking for local residents. Though it was a wooded area, it was located near residential homes. Upon seeing a crowd of police officers and forensic experts, several service vehicles and yellow tape stretched between trees around a small section of the forest, they immediately realized something extraordinary had occurred. People often went there for walks and never imagined that a few feet away from them, the body of a missing girl who had been searched for throughout the year was buried. Thanks to the efforts of the Johnson family, public activist Quanell X, and Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, Houston's population knew about this story and sympathized with Felicia's loved ones. Forensic examination confirmed through dental records that these skeletal remains indeed belonged to Felicia Johnson, who had vanished a year ago. Since only the upper part of the girl's torso was found, determining the cause of death wasn't possible. One thing was clear: the demise wasn't natural. It was also unclear what happened to the rest of the body. Either animals had scattered them, or Chukwebuka had hidden them in different places. It's possible that years later, other fragments might be found, providing additional information on the case. But for the Johnson family, this was already a victory. Felicia's father made a statement saying his daughter had returned to seek justice. He felt relief that he could put an end to this part of the story. The man was glad that his child would soon return home in one form or another. Then, the grief-stricken father, Kevin, issued a chilling warning to the alleged perpetrator, vowing to put his life on the line to find him. These few months during which he waited for answers about what happened to his daughter were a real ordeal. He was overwhelmed with emotions. His health suffered. But now that Felicia would be nearby, he and his family wouldn't rest until they achieved justice for her. As a father, it's very difficult for him to comprehend what happened to his daughter and what she went through. In fact, Kevin Johnson has been battling depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and hypertension for the past year. He couldn't sleep and couldn't come to terms with reality, while the villain who took his daughter away remained unfound and unconvicted. Incredibly, to this day, Chukwebuka Nwobodo is still on the run. It's possible this monster has committed more than one bloody crime. He's a dangerous individual and could be near someone who hasn't heard about Felicia Johnson's case. The best thing you can do is share this video with friends. Let justice finally prevail and the innocent victims of this criminal be avenged. Kevin Johnson, along with his family, dreams of creating a foundation in Felicia's honor that will help women who have faced forceful involvement in selling their bodies, as this is a global problem. A person's line of work doesn't make them less worthy of life or less deserving of compassion. Felicia Johnson wasn't just a 24-year-old dancer. She was a daughter, sister, friend who deserved to live a long and beautiful life, despite everything. Rick and Susan had a perfect life, a spacious house in a peaceful neighborhood, 2 adorable children, well-paying jobs, and financial stability. However, inside the Wamsley residence lurked dark secrets, which began to unravel after the police received an unusual call to 911. Christmas was approaching when police in the quiet town of Mansville, Texas, responded to an open-line call to 911. Upon arrival, officers found 2 garages open and the side entrance to the house unlocked. Inside, they encountered a shocking scene. Rick Wamsley, a beloved local accountant, and his cheerful wife Susie had been deprived of life in their own home. It appeared the crime had actually occurred long before the emergency call was made. Rick and Susie Wamsley were friends during their high school years in Oklahoma in the 1970s. They weren't exactly high school sweethearts, just classmates who stood out to each other. Years later, while Rick studied at Oklahoma State University and Susie at a state Christian college, the young people rekindled their school-age fondness and unexpectedly began dating. Eventually, their youthful affection blossomed into serious feelings. Rick and Susie decided they wanted to start a family, have children, and grow old together. The couple wed, and in 1978 they welcomed their baby girl, Sarah, followed by their son, Andrew, 6 years later. Rick qualified as a certified accountant and worked successfully in the oil and gas industry. Over the years, the family moved several times. Fortunately, Rick's career opportunities allowed for this. Eventually, the Wamsleys settled in Fort Worth, located in northeastern Texas along the Trinity River. Fort Worth is among the largest cities in the United States, with a population of about 1 million people. However, despite its size, it's a cozy and quiet city with its own history and traditions. In this city, Rick established his own accounting practice in his home office, which brought in a decent income. By 2003, the Wamsley family was living in an upscale area of Mansville, 20 miles from Fort Worth. By then, 25-year-old Sarah had become a mother herself and lived separately in her own apartment. 19-year-old Andrew had recently graduated high school. The young man had started attending college classes while also working part-time at a mini golf course. Rick and Susie had a very happy marriage. In July 2003, the couple celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with friends and family, and in December of that year, they wanted to throw a fun family celebration for their 25th Christmas together. Susie prepared thoroughly for this day. She spent hours selecting decorations and gifts for her loved ones, adorned her house inside and out with all sorts of garlands, and placed Christmas figurines in the yard. A large tree with bright lights and colorful ornaments was set up in the living room, with boxes and packages of presents for the whole family underneath. The woman lovingly wrapped each gift, imagining how her loved ones would rejoice when they found what they had dreamed of under the tree. This picturesque pre-holiday scene in Mansfield seemed magical, but only until an alarming call to the 911 dispatcher prompted patrol cars from emergency response services and crime scene investigators to descend upon the quiet, prestigious neighborhood. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. On December 11th, 2003, at 11:41 p.m., an operator in Mansville received a phone call from the Wamsley family home. There was nothing but silence on the other end of the line. This could indicate that someone clearly needed help, but couldn't speak. Showing vigilance, the dispatcher sent a patrol car to the family's house. Arriving at the possible incident site, police officers circled the house and peered through the windows. Getting no response to ringing and knocking on the door, but finding the side door leading to the garage left open, the officers entered the home. They walked through the kitchen and noticed that the landline phone, attached to the wall, had been taken off the hook and left lying on the kitchen table. Moving into the living room, they found the lady of the house, 45-year-old Susie Wamsley. She was lying on the couch and was already cold to the touch. In the foyer near the front door, law enforcement found the head of the family, 46-year-old Rick. He was lying in a pool of blood, and unfortunately, no one could help him anymore. At 0:17, paramedics arrived and confirmed the conclusion that Susie and Rick were dead. The house was immediately cordoned off, and an investigation began. The bodies of the deceased owners were sent to the forensic laboratory. The autopsy revealed that the woman died from a gunshot wound, but that wasn't all. She had received 7 stab wounds. Presumably they were inflicted after her soul had left her body. Most likely Susie had dozed off in the living room while watching TV when she was attacked. In the same room, near the rug by the fireplace, detectives found 2 bloody palm prints that could have been left by the perpetrator. They also found a bullet, 2 pieces of a blue plastic hair clip, and another piece of plastic on the floor nearby. Rick met the same fate as his wife, though perhaps not as quickly. Bullet holes in the headboard of the bed in the master bedroom indicated that the attack on the head of the family began in this room before moving to the hallway. There was no blood in the bedroom. It was assumed that Rick woke up from the gunshots and either ran out of the room or attacked the intruder himself, rushing out of the master bedroom. Apparently, the man wasn't going to give up easily and put up resistance. A tuft of hair in his left hand spoke of a struggle and became valuable evidence in the investigation. Rick Wamsley was also shot and received approximately 11 knife wounds to his back. Detectives didn't want to miss anything and meticulously examined every room in the house, every carpet, and every piece of furniture for evidence. The hair in Rick's hand and the fragment of a broken hair clip found on the living room floor were sent to experts for DNA sampling. The Wamsleys' spacious home was thoroughly checked for fingerprints, and each room was searched. Investigators looked for signs that the well-off family might have been robbed. Perhaps the owners woke up at the most inopportune moment and startled the thieves, forcing them to use weapons. But the number of stab wounds made them think twice. However, this theory was dismissed after nearly $15,000 in cash was found in the master bedroom. Even in a cursory search, a criminal would have found and taken this money. But given that it remained in the bedside table, the robbery theory was deemed unviable. As it turned out a little later, no valuables were missing from the house, and there were no signs of forced entry. Neighbors and friends, shocked by the terrible news, shared their thoughts with the police. They couldn't imagine who could have done this to Rick and Susie. They were very nice, wonderful people who often entertained guests in their home and were always ready to help those in need. Such an unexpected tragedy in a quiet neighborhood, unfolding on the eve of the holiday, made people worry and fear for their lives. Rick and Susie Wamsley seemed to have an ideal life. They lived in a spacious house. Rick worked as an accountant whose practice thrived. He also enjoyed working in the yard and taking his son to Texas Rangers baseball games. Susie was a housewife who kept the family home in order and cared for the children. In her free time, she always tried to devote joint activities with her son or daughter. But what happened behind closed doors was significantly different from the external picture. According to some close ones, there was always tension inside the Wamsley house, especially regarding the 2 children, Sarah and Andrew. As a teenager, the girl was kicked out of the house for behaving inappropriately. As a result, Sarah became pregnant at 19 and entered into an unhealthy relationship with her daughter's father, a man named Todd Cleveland. She also constantly argued with her younger brother Andrew. The teenagers never felt much love for each other. According to Sarah's ex-boyfriend, the Wamsley family was always skeptical of outsiders. Even their friends, Susie and Rick, allegedly suspected of pretending, believing that they just wanted something from them. In this context, growing prosperity seemed more of a hindrance to their happiness than a blessing for life. According to some reports, the Wamsleys' married life was unstable, although they tried not to show it in public. In the Wamsley family, there was an agreement that if the children enrolled in college and studied there, they would receive financial support. This arrangement didn't work out with Sarah, but Andrew convinced his parents that he was determined to fulfill his promise to them. Susie and Rick gifted their son a new white Mustang, paid for insurance, and provided money for expenses. Andrew lived in the family home without contributing to the household budget, and everything seemed wonderful. The only problem was that the young man didn't fulfill his part of the agreement. Andrew, like his sister, dropped out of college without completing his education. When his parents eventually found out about this, they cut off all financial support. But Susie and Rick didn't go so far as to throw the boy out of the house. While tension persisted in the family, 19-year-old Andrew decided to spend most of his free time hanging out with friends at the local Pancake House, a restaurant that specialized in breakfasts. It was there that a friend introduced him to his sister, 19-year-old Chelsea Richardson. Sarah Wamsley was informed of her parents' death at 4 a.m. after their bodies were discovered. However, the younger son Andrew was nowhere to be seen. The police had already turned to the media asking anyone who had seen the teenager's car to report its whereabouts. But while forensic experts continued to work at the scene, a white Mustang pulled up to the Wamsley house. Rick and Susie's younger son Andrew and his girlfriend Chelsea Richardson got out of the car. These two had been hanging out at Chelsea's for several days. That morning they were watching the news and learned about the tragedy at the family home. The young people were immediately asked to follow a service vehicle to the police station for questioning. The conversation with Andrew lasted about 45 minutes. The guy hadn't been to his home for several days and hadn't communicated with his parents. It turned out that all this time he had been living at his girlfriend Chelsea's place. Apart from fresh scratches on Andrew's hand, there was nothing suspicious in his story. The young man was free to leave the police station, but before he did so, he was asked to sign a consent form allowing investigators to search his car. In a conversation with his sister after the interrogation, Andrew said that forensic experts would surely find their mother's blood in the Mustang. According to Andrew, the woman had recently cut her finger and then drove to the store, for some reason taking her son's car. So this would explain the presence of possible blood drops. Chelsea Richardson's story at the police station completely matched Andrew's testimony. They had spent the last 2 days together and had been inseparable since they met and started dating last fall. Sometimes they spent whole nights in a 24-hour cafe playing a Japanese collectible card game called Master Duel, where participants use cards to battle each other. It was an imitation of a battle of fantastic monsters. The central character of this game was described as an infantile and weak boy, but when he played games, he became a hero. These games united the couple so much that Andrew and Chelsea began to seriously think about marriage. The girl's mother supported this relationship and adored her daughter's boyfriend. However, Rick and Susie Wamsley openly expressed their disappointment with their son's choice. Andrew's parents wanted a completely different type of girl for their son. The Richardsons lived on the outskirts of Fort Worth, in a place known as the Blue Collar District, or simply the working class area. It sharply contrasted with the million-dollar homes that lined the streets of Mansfield. A few years ago, Chelsea unexpectedly lost her beloved father to a heart attack. Her mother sometimes had to juggle 3 different jobs to stay afloat. Nevertheless, the Richardsons were considered generous people. The extrovert Chelsea was quite popular in her school. Her cheerful nature and merry disposition even earned her the nickname Bubbles. Her best friend, Susanna Polidana, sometimes benefited from Chelsea's generosity. When the teenage girl quarreled with her mother, she was warmly welcomed into the Richardson home, where she lived for several months. The 3 teenagers, Andrew, Chelsea, and Susanna, were together on the night Andrew's parents died. Chelsea's ex-boyfriend, Jeremy Lavender, confirmed that they were hanging out at his house and didn't go anywhere. So the young people had an alibi. Sarah Wamsley informed the police that her daughter's father, Todd Cleveland, might be involved in her parents' death. They had been arguing lately about custody, and recently Sarah had threatened to call Child Protective Services. A day after she made this threat and a month before the tragedy, another suspicious incident occurred. In early November, Sarah was returning home with her parents after horseback riding lessons. They were driving through a neighboring town looking for a place to eat. Suddenly, her father's Jeep was jolted. Rick thought that perhaps a large stone from the road had hit the car, but when he stopped to check the damage, the family was surprised to discover it wasn't a stone. There was a bullet hole in the rear of the vehicle's body. Frightened and confused, Susie quickly made 2 phone calls. For some reason, she first called her son Andrew, not the police. The woman thought the car following them from the ranch was a white Mustang. Not knowing what to think, Susie had assumed Andrew was driving behind them until the Jeep was shot at. The second call was made to the police. The mother filed a report about the incident. Sarah recalled that at the time, she believed Todd Cleveland was responsible for the incident, and only now began to wonder why her mother had called her younger brother first. The fact was that Sarah and Andrew were set to inherit a $1 million insurance policy from their father. Additionally, their family home was valued at about $1,650,000, and there was around $100,000 in cash, plus other assets left by Rick and Susie. Investigators checked Sarah's suspicions and eventually ruled out her former partner Todd as a suspect. Given the financial benefit and family tension, both Wamsley children remained of greater interest to investigators. However, DNA analysis and fingerprinting didn't reveal matches with any family members. There was no evidence that Rick and Susie's son and daughter were connected to the crime scene in any way. Despite this, Sarah filed a petition to block Andrew from inheriting any family assets. She believed he was responsible for their parents' deaths and feared her brother might want to get rid of her too. Although forensic examination of Andrew's car confirmed the presence of blood on the back seat and headrests, the Mustang had been thoroughly washed. Therefore, experts' attempts to collect a viable DNA sample were unsuccessful. Law enforcement couldn't even confirm whose blood was left in the car. Several months after Rick and Susie Wamsley's tragic deaths, the investigation reached a dead end. The district attorney needed more information, so the police department decided to convene a grand jury and start issuing subpoenas to those who were connected to the deceased couple in some way. They began by verifying the son and daughter's alibis. Jeremy Lavender, Chelsea's ex-boyfriend, testified under oath that Andrew and his friends were with him that night, providing a solid alibi. Chelsea's best friend Susanna said the same thing after giving her testimony. Additionally, Susanna voluntarily agreed to provide a DNA sample to compare with evidence from the crime scene. At that moment, no one expected this would become a turning point in the investigation. Susanna Toledano had moved to Texas from Illinois several years earlier. She didn't fit in well with her new classmates at school. She wasn't particularly diligent, smart, or charismatic. Susanna constantly skipped classes and argued with her mother. Chelsea Richardson became Susanna's lifeline. The girls grew so close that Chelsea wrote a note in the school yearbook dedicated to their strong friendship and composed a poem titled Friends Forever. When investigators compared Susanna Toledano's DNA with the strand of hair in Rick's hand and DNA taken from the broken hair clip at the crime scene, they found a match. At that moment, detectives realized there was much more to this story. Susanna Toledano was arrested on suspicion of killing the Wamsley couple, potentially facing the death penalty. Realizing the gravity of her situation, the girl began to talk. Initially, Susanna told the police that on the night of the crime, she was walking with a friend, a 25-year-old man named Hilario Cardenas. Hilario had a gun and needed money. He allegedly entered the Wamsley house alone in the middle of the night, leaving Susanna outside. Then she heard gunshots and ran to the scene. Her hair was left in the house after the family head Rick begged her to stop the attack, but because she wasn't really involved, she had no way to stop it. So who was Hilario Cardenas? This person, it turned out, worked as a night manager at a local restaurant where the friends frequently spent their leisure time. He had a young daughter in his care and was desperately in need of funds. Hilario learned about the Wamsley family's wealth after meeting and befriending Andrew. During questioning, Hilario denied involvement in the attack, but admitted to acquiring a gun for $200 at Andrew Wamsley's request. Andrew, his girlfriend Chelsea, and Susanna Toledano wanted to practice target shooting at an acquaintance's farm. Investigators sought to confirm the night manager Hilario's story and started with the owners of the property, where the teenagers allegedly practiced shooting. The property owner turned out to be a friend of Chelsea's mother, and she indeed confirmed Hilario's words. A few months before the tragedy, Andrew, Chelsea, and Susanna came to her approximately 3-acre plot and took turns practicing shooting at a small pond. The woman had never seen or heard anything about Hilario Cardenas, who subsequently gained the police's trust by passing a lie detector test. The pond on the farm property was drained, and forensic experts collected bullets from the bottom. Investigators concluded that Hilario was telling the truth. The 3 teenagers had indeed been practicing their marksmanship for several months in preparation for the crime. The bullets fired in the Wamsley house and the bullets from the bottom of the pond matched. Thus, Susanna's initial version, accusing Hilario of attacking the Wamsley couple, fell apart. But she was given another chance to tell the truth and directly accuse her best friend. This time, the story she told was more intricate. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video. It's really important. According to Susanna's new account, the three teenagers spent nights at a local cafe plotting their sinister plans. They calculated that after Rick and Susie's deaths, Andrew would inherit over $1 million. This sum would set them up for life. The friends could live together. Susanna could finally quit her hated, low-paying job and buy a new car. So they convinced the night manager to buy them a gun. After target practice on the farm, the teenagers concluded that Susanna was the most accurate shooter among them. They proceeded with their first plan, to shoot at Rick's Jeep's gas tank. If the operation had been successful, they would have eliminated everyone standing in the way of their enrichment, Rick, Susie, and Sarah, in one shot. When Susanna, riding with Andrew in his white Mustang behind the Jeep, missed, they moved to Plan B, breaking into the Wamsley house in the middle of the night. The teenagers thought it would look like a robbery, and no one would ever be able to connect the crime to any of them. When the initial plan failed, Chelsea became very angry with her friend. She and Andrew pressured her and demanded she finish what they started. The teenagers helped Susanna sneak into the parents' house and hid her in the closet in Andrew's bedroom along with the gun. The couple urged her to do everything quickly so they could return home. Susanna sat in the closet for several hours before fleeing. She couldn't bring herself to shoot Andrew's parents. But early in the morning of December 11th, 2003, the teenagers made another attempt, and this time, there was no turning back. Susanna confessed that she entered the house with a gun in hand while Andrew and Chelsea were armed with knives. It was Susanna who found the lady of the house, Susie, on the couch and shot her. Then Andrew led her to the master bedroom. The girl shot at Rick but missed. The bullets hit the headboard and woke up the 46-year-old man. The homeowner lunged at the attackers and a fight ensued. Then Andrew took the initiative. He took the weapon from the girl, thrust a knife into her hand, and sent her to check on Susie. He himself, along with Chelsea, stayed to decide his father's fate. Before leaving the foyer, Susanna saw Rick Wamsley already on his knees, asking his son's girlfriend, "Why?" And Chelsea replied, "Because she was pregnant." Rick tried to convince the young people that he could help them, but immediately after that, a shot rang out. Susanna didn't know which of her friends pulled the trigger, and then inflicted knife wounds on the man. In exchange for testifying against her friends, Susanna Toledano was able to avoid the fate that now awaited Chelsea and Andrew. Friends of the Wamsley family couldn't even entertain the thought that a son raised by Rick and Susie could raise a hand against his parents. They insisted that the boy was incapable of such treachery and prayed for his release. The testimony of the former best friend served as the foundation for the case against both Chelsea and Andrew, despite Susanna lying to law enforcement several times before presenting her final version of events. On July 1st, 2004, nearly 7 months after the horrific crime, Tarrant County authorities charged Andrew and his girlfriend. Chelsea Richardson herself unintentionally did everything possible to strengthen the state's case against her. Several prison informants who shared a cell with Chelsea were invited to testify, and each of them stated that the girl either boasted to them about her involvement in the killing of her boyfriend's parents or tried to convince them to create a solid alibi for her. Chelsea's initial alibi, provided by Jeremy Lavender, was disproven. Jeremy turned out to be a naive guy who was easily manipulated. He was convinced that Chelsea Richardson was his girlfriend and that he should lie to the jury to protect her. He later changed his story, admitting he wasn't with the teenagers that evening. Chelsea, once a cheerful high school student, was portrayed as a sort of mastermind behind the criminal operation. The prosecution asserted that she convinced Andrew he would be better off without his family and persuaded her best friend Susanna Toledano, who was also naive and easily swayed, to end the lives of her boyfriend's father and mother. The jury was shown a message written by Chelsea to her friend while under arrest. Chelsea begged Susanna to place the blame on Hilario. She also claimed to be pregnant with Andrew's child. All Susanna needed to do was tell the detectives they had nothing to do with the crime. This would give Chelsea and Andrew's future child a chance at a happy life with mom and dad. The note ended with, "Friends forever." During questioning, Susanna admitted she didn't believe Chelsea was actually pregnant. But Susanna's testimony was the only link connecting the teenagers to the crime and reason to believe any of them actively participated in the killings. And this testimony played a crucial role in the prosecution. It proved devastating for the defense of both alleged conspirators. The jury believed Susanna's account. It took the court less than 4 hours to find 21-year-old Chelsea Richardson guilty. Then, after another 2 hours of deliberation, they unanimously concluded that the defendant posed a danger to society due to her actions and sentenced her to death by lethal injection. Andrew Wamsley's lawyers managed to convince the jury not to send him to death row. They argued that the young man suffered from schizoid personality disorder, making it unlikely he would be prone to violence in the future. Defense witnesses during the sentencing phase presented Andrew's life as miserable and devoid of meaning. He was characterized as a youth incapable of understanding love or attachment in his relationships. During the 2006 trial, Andrew stated that he took his parents' lives not for money, but because they subjected him to emotional and physical abuse, but the jury didn't believe him. Andrew Wamsley, at age 23, was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 2044. Hilario Cardenas, the night manager of the cafe where the teenagers planned the terrible crime over long nights, was also found guilty. Although he didn't directly participate in the attack, he was charged with the less serious offense of conspiracy to commit a felony and sentenced to 50 years in prison. He became eligible for parole after serving a third of his term in 2023. Chelsea Richardson, the apparent mastermind of the entire operation, spent just over 10 years on death row in Texas. In early 2012, her legal team succeeded in having her death sentence commuted to life imprisonment. This was prompted by Susana Toledano's statement that she could have prevented the killings. The defense portrayed Chelsea's best friend, not Chelsea herself, as the key figure in the conspiracy. Susana Toledano is currently incarcerated. She will be eligible for parole in the spring of 2034. This is how young people dreaming of a carefree existence outsmarted themselves. Now they certainly won't have to worry about their daily bread for practically the rest of their lives. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon.